The Fractured Atlas. Chapter 1. The Flood Line. The seawall was never meant to hold this long. Myra stood on its cracked concrete lip, sketchbook balanced against her thigh, pencil racing to catch the shape of the tide as it shouldered against the barrier. Spray stung her face, cold and briny, carrying the sharp smell of rot from drowned trees farther inland. Below her, waves pounded again and again, as if rehearsing for the final collapse. Behind her, the siren began to wail, 2 long bursts, 1 short. Evacuation drill. She didn't move. "Kaylin," a voice barked from the ramp. "You deaf or just suicidal?" Myra turned. Leif, her fellow surveyor, was jogging up the incline, orange safety vest flapping against the wind. His hair, tied back in a careless knot, was already soaked. He cupped his hands to his mouth. "Council says off the wall. Drill's not optional." Myra held up her sketchbook, pages fluttering. "Just another minute." Leif frowned. "You can draw drowning houses later. Move." But Myra couldn't, not yet. She'd been tracing the tide lines all week, recording how each surge crept a little higher on the wall's battered face. This wave, this line of foam, was different. It licked the edge of a crack that hadn't been there yesterday. A spidering fissure, running like a fault line toward the guardrail. She drew quickly, hands steady despite the roar of water. "One more," she muttered. "Then I'll go." Leif groaned, stomped closer. "Your father had the same look before he cut himself short." Myra's pencil stopped. She snapped the sketchbook closed and shoved it into her satchel. "Before he what?" Leif's jaw tightened. "Before he vanished chasing stories that couldn't keep the sea out." The siren wailed again, louder, angrier. Myra stepped down from the wall without answering. They walked back through the narrow streets together, boots sloshing in puddles where brine seeped through storm drains. The town was half empty now, rows of boarded windows, paint peeling, roofs sagging under neglect. Salt had already claimed the brickwork, leaving white scars across the walls. "Council meets tonight," Leif said, breaking the silence. "Another vote on relocation." "They'll vote the same way," Myra replied. "Half for leaving, half for staying. Nothing changes." "You sound like you want it to." "I don't," she said quickly. Then softer, "I just don't like watching them erase the town before it's gone." Leif shot her a sidelong glance. "Erasures don't matter if everyone's drowned." Myra pressed her lips together. He didn't understand. Most people didn't. The municipal archive was tucked behind the old council hall, a squat stone building with mildew climbing its flanks. Inside, the air was dry but stale, heavy with dust and forgotten ink. Myra had made the archive her second home. She dropped her satchel on the long oak table, pulled out her sketchbook, and compared today's sketches to last week. The cracks were spreading faster than she'd admitted, even to herself. As she leaned back, her gaze drifted to the cabinets lining the far wall, tall steel drawers labeled with neat white tags. Coastal Surveys, 1940–1960. Evacuation Plans, 1992,000. Hydrographic Records. Her father had lived in these cabinets before he disappeared. Myra rose, absently running her fingers along the cool metal handles until one caught drawer half jammed. She tugged. It screeched open reluctantly, revealing folders stuffed with brittle parchment. At the back was a thin bundle bound with twine. No label. She hesitated, then drew it out. The parchment inside was different, older, darker, its edges singed by salt. The first sheet stopped her breath. It was a map, but unfinished. Half its surface was etched with careful ink lines, a coastline curling like a question mark. The other half was blank, faint traces of erased lines lingering like ghosts. And in the corner, a scrawl in faded pencil. What is lost can only be seen when the world forgets. Myra's hand trembled. She knew that handwriting. Elia's, she whispered. Find something. She spun. Leif was leaning against the doorway, dripping water onto the stone floor. Myra quickly closed the parchment. Nothing useful. His eyes narrowed. You're a bad liar. It's nothing, old scrap. Leif stepped forward, gaze flicking to the bundle in her hands. Myra. Leave it, she snapped, more sharply than intended. For a moment, the room was filled only with the hum of the overhead lights. Leif sighed, lifting his hands. Fine, keep your secrets. Just remember, your father's secrets didn't save him either. He turned and left, boots echoing down the hall. Myra exhaled slowly, clutching the parchment to her chest. She waited until the sound of footsteps faded, then spread the map open again. Her father had been here. He'd touched this page, written these words, and he'd vanished because of it. The tide pounded harder outside, rattling the window panes. The siren wailed one last time before cutting off, leaving a ringing silence. Myra traced the faint, erased lines with her finger. They weren't random, they curved, intersected, hinted at shapes beneath the blankness. She felt a shiver crawl up her spine. This was no ordinary map. It was a message, and somehow she knew it was meant for her. Chapter 2, The Archive. The rain had settled into a steady percussion on the archive windows. By the time Myra spread the map across the table again, a single desk lamp cast its glow across the parchment, picking out the etched ink lines like veins on an ancient leaf. She leaned close, pencil in hand, tracing without touching. The inked side showed the familiar outline of the coast she had drawn 100 times. But the erased half, its faint indentations pulled at her like a half-remembered song. She flipped through the rest of the bundle. More sheets, some nearly blank. Notes scribbled in the margins, her father's quick hand looping across the page. Memory is not fixed. Find the patterns beneath forgetting. Myra whispered the words, heart aching. She hadn't heard his voice in 10 years, but she could almost hear it now, quiet and insistent. urging her to look closer. She pulled the magnifier from her satchel and tilted the lamp. Under the angled light, the faint indentations revealed themselves more clearly: curves, intersecting arcs, dots scattered like stars. They weren't erased at all, only hidden. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a half-finished coastline. It was something else. The door creaked. Myra. She jumped, nearly spilling the lamp. Councilwoman Althea stood in the doorway, her rain cloak dripping onto the stone tiles. "You're still here?" Althea asked, eyebrows raised. "Working," Myra said quickly, sliding a blank folder over the parchment. Althea stepped inside, pulling back her hood. She was in her 60s, hair iron gray, lines etched deep into her face from years of salt air and council disputes. Her eyes, though, were sharp as glass. "I thought Leif dragged you out with the rest," she said. "Drill ended an hour ago. I stayed to finish sketches." Althea's gaze lingered on the folder Myra had just slid across the table. For a moment, Myra thought she might ask. Instead, the councilwoman sighed. "Another vote tonight. You'll be there." Myra hesitated. "Maybe." "You should," Althea said. "Your surveys matter." "My surveys won't change anyone's mind." Althea gave her a tired smile. "Maps don't change minds, Myra, but they remind us what we're losing. That's worth something." The words pricked her, almost cruel in their irony. If only Althea knew what was in front of her now. When the councilwoman left, Myra sank back into her chair, staring at the covered parchment. Althea's voice echoed. "Maps remind us what we're losing. But what if maps could remind us what we'd already forgotten?" Later, Myra carried the bundle home under her coat, heart hammering each time the wind rattled the shutters of abandoned houses. Her own cottage sat at the edge of the canal, water lapping just below the doorstep. She lit a lamp, set the bundle on her desk, and spread the sheets once more. The erased lines drew her in. She took tracing paper, laid it carefully over the parchment, and began sketching the faint arcs. Slowly, the patterns emerged: spirals, overlapping circles, symbols that looked less like geography and more like memory. She frowned. What did her father mean? Find the patterns beneath forgetting. Her pencil hovered over one curve. Something about it stirred recognition. Not from maps, something older. A knock rattled her door. Myra stiffened, slid the parchment under the desk blotter, and opened the door. Leif stood there, soaked again. "You didn't come to supper," he said. "I wasn't hungry." "You're never hungry when you're obsessed." He stepped inside without waiting, dripping onto the floorboards. His eyes flicked to her desk. Still working. Myra crossed her arms. Still interfering. "Someone has to. You vanish into those papers like your father did. You remember how that ended. Stop comparing me to him." Leif's gaze softened. "I'm not your enemy, Myra. I just don't want to watch you drown in the same madness." She turned away, fists tightening. Maybe he wasn't mad. Maybe he was right. Leif was quiet for a long moment. Then, why is he gone? The question sliced through her. She didn't answer. Leif sighed, shaking water from his hair. Council meets in an hour. Come with me. At least hear what they're planning. Myra looked back at the desk. The bundle seemed to hum in the lamplight. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded, knowing better than to press. Don't stay up all night. Tide's rising again tomorrow. When he left, Myra bolted the door and returned to the parchment. Her father's scrawl seemed almost alive under the lamplight. What is lost can only be seen when the world forgets. She whispered it aloud, as though saying the words might unlock them. The rain hammered harder, and outside, the tide reached the base of her doorstep. That night, Myra dreamed of her father. He stood at the seawall, sketchbook in hand, his face obscured by shadows. The tide surged around him, erasing the ground beneath his feet. He turned toward her and spoke, but the words were lost in the roar of water. When she woke, her hand was clenched around the pencil she'd fallen asleep with, and the tracing paper was covered with spirals she didn't remember drawing. The council hall smelled of damp wool and arguments. By the time Myra arrived, the chamber was already crowded, half the town crammed into the rows of benches, some standing along the walls. Faces weary, voices raised. Councilwoman Althea sat at the front with Elder Jonas and 2 younger members, papers spread before them. Jonas was speaking. We cannot abandon this town. Our fathers built it, their fathers before them. The sea has taken much, but not everything. Not yet. A younger official shot back. And when the sea wall cracks, when the next storm hits, do you want corpses floating down the canal? We need to relocate while we still can. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Myra slipped into a back bench, clutching her satchel. Althea raised her hand for silence. We will vote. But understand this. Relocation means safety. Staying means risk. We cannot pretend otherwise. Jonas's voice broke, but carried. Safety without memory is not living. It is erasure. The words jolted Myra. Erasure. The same word her father had written. She almost stood, almost pulled the parchment from her satchel to show them, but something held her back. Not yet. Not until she understood what it meant. Her gaze drifted across the chamber and froze. Near the back, leaning against the wall, stood a man she didn't recognize. Too well-dressed for the town, suit pressed, shoes polished despite the mud outside. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away, expression unreadable. Something in her gut twisted. She pressed her satchel closer. The vote was called. Voices rose, hands lifted. As expected, a dead split, half to stay, half to leave. No decision again. The chamber dissolved into frustrated chatter. Myra slipped out quickly, glancing back once. The stranger was gone. Outside, the tide whispered against the cobblestones. She pulled her coat tighter and hurried home. the satchel heavy against her side. She didn't see the man watching from the shadows, eyes fixed on the bundle she carried. Chapter 3: Shadows and Ink. The library's reading lamps were the only light left in the archive that night, their yellow halos falling over parchment like moons caught in jars. Myra hunched at the long table, sleeves rolled up, eyes burning from too many hours staring at the map. She'd tried tracing the faint, erased lines with graphite, tried angling the parchment beneath the lamplight, even breathed softly across its surface like her father used to when coaxing old ink back to life. Nothing, until the scratching. At first, she thought it was a rat in the wall. Then, she realized the sound came from the parchment itself, a dry whisper, like quill on vellum. The faint lines seemed to thicken under her gaze, darkening into legibility. Curves of ink swelled where none had been a moment before. Her breath caught. "You're writing yourself." The lines formed the outline of an island. But there was no island in the bay. She knew every reef, every spit of sand. This was impossible. Still chasing ghosts. She jolted, nearly toppling her lamp. Leif stood in the doorway again, but this time he looked less annoyed and more wary. His gaze darted to the parchment. "You can't keep breaking in here after hours," he said. "The archivist will gut you." Myra shoved her body over the map. "What are you doing here?" "Council sent me. They want updated sketches of the sea wall by morning." Her laugh was sharp. "And they sent you because you're so good with charcoal. Because I know where to find you when you're hiding." Their eyes locked. The air between them carried the tension of unspoken things, their history, her father's shadow, the way Leif's loyalty to the council grated against Myra's loyalty to the past. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Myra, what are you looking for, really?" She hesitated, torn between the urge to thrust the map in his face and the instinct to protect it. At last, she muttered, "Answers. About Elias." She nodded. Leif's jaw worked. For a heartbeat, his expression softened. Then he straightened, all caution again. "Answers won't hold back the tide." Before she could reply, the door creaked open. The archivist shuffled in, lantern swinging from his crooked hand. His beard was wild, his spectacles smeared with fingerprints, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. "You," he croaked at Myra. "Step away from the parchment." Myra froze. "How did you? You think I wouldn't notice the one drawer I keep sealed?" Her heart hammered. "You mean this map was hidden on purpose?" The archivist's gaze flicked to the parchment beneath her hands. For an instant, something like fear crossed his face. Then it was gone. "That scrap is dangerous," he said. "Your father learned that too late." Myra surged to her feet. "You knew Elias." The archivist grimaced. Everyone knew Elias, the fool who thought the past was a lifeboat. Her chest ached. He wasn't a fool. The archivist leaned closer, voice dropping to a rasp. "Then tell me why he vanished into the sea with nothing but ink and riddles in his pockets. The words cut deep, but before Myra could muster an answer, the parchment gave another dry scratch. All three of them stared. The ink continued to bloom across the blank half of the map, curling into new coastlines, symbols, marks that shimmered faintly as though resisting the lamplight. The archivist recoiled. "No, not again." "What is it?" Leif demanded. The old man turned, already backing toward the door. "Seal it away. Burn it if you can. Nothing good comes from maps that change themselves." Then he was gone, lanterns swinging into the dark corridor, leaving the echo of his words heavy in the silence. Myra looked down at the parchment. The new coastline glittered faintly, as if wet, and at its center, a single word had appeared, inked in her father's unmistakable hand. Home. Later, in the salt-bitten air outside, Leif caught her arm before she could slip away. "Myra, whatever that thing is, whatever it's doing, you have to stop." Her satchel was clutched tight against her side. "You saw the handwriting. That was my father. You don't know that. Could be an old forgery, some trick of the ink." She shook her head. "You didn't see the way it moved. That wasn't old ink. That was alive." Leif's grip tightened. "And if it's alive, it's dangerous. Don't let grief blind you." Myra wrenched free, anger burning her throat. "Grief is the only thing that hasn't drowned here." She left him in the street, his shadow stretching long against the broken wall, and walked alone toward the drowned quarter where the tide gnawed at abandoned homes. The map in her satchel pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat. That night, she dreamt of her father. He was standing at the seawall, lantern in hand, face turned away. When he finally looked at her, his mouth moved soundlessly. Then he raised the lantern higher, and in its glow, Myra saw not water, but a vast terrain spreading where the bay should be mountains, forests, rivers stitched together by lines of light. The map, when she reached for him, he crumbled into salt. Myra woke with the taste of brine on her lips, and the words still echoing in her skull. Home. Chapter 4. The Drowned Quarter. The drowned quarter always smelled of rust and seaweed. Myra stepped carefully across a collapsed pier, boots slipping on wet planks, her satchel pressed tight against her hip. The tide lapped hungrily at the skeletal remains of houses that jutted from the water like gravestones. Salt had devoured their beams, paint stripped to gray bone. Some rooftops poked above the waterline like the fins of half-buried ships. She had not been back here since she was a child. Her father used to bring her, telling stories about families who had once strung lanterns across these alleys, about the baker who sang at dawn, about the painter who never finished his murals before the floods came. Now the alleys were canals, and silence was the only voice left. Myra pulled the parchment from her satchel, shielding it from the mist. The ink had shifted again overnight. A faint circle pulsed faintly on the coastline, the drowned quarter. At its center was a symbol she didn't recognize, a spiral surrounded by tiny marks like stars. The map was telling her to come here. She stepped into knee-high water, lanterns swinging above her head. Her reflection rippled beneath her boots, stretched and broken. Of all the places to die, a voice muttered behind her, "You'd pick this one." Myra spun. Leif stood at the edge of the pier, arms folded, expression tight. "You followed me. You're predictable," he said flatly. "You vanish after midnight, clutching that cursed thing like it's a compass. Where else would you go but the quarter?" Myra scowled. "Go back. I don't need a chaperone." "Maybe not, but you'll need a rescuer when the current takes you." She wanted to argue, but the water was already pulling at her legs with surprising force. Silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken compromise. At last, she turned and waded on. Leif followed, cursing under his breath every time his boots caught on submerged debris. They reached what had once been the main square. Myra remembered the fountain. Her father had lifted her onto its edge when she was small, telling her to throw a coin for luck. Now, the fountain's basin was filled with brine barnacles clinging to its marble lip. The parchment glowed faintly in her hand. The spiral symbol shimmered at the square's center. "It's here," she whispered. Leif glanced at the paper, then at the fountain. "And what exactly are we looking for?" "Buried treasure. Something my father left." Leif's jaw worked. He wanted to argue, but didn't. Myra set her lantern on the fountain's rim and leaned over. The water shimmered strangely, as though lit from beneath. She plunged her hand in freezing cold and felt smooth stone, then something else. Metal. Her fingers closed around it. When she pulled her hand free, she held a small brass compass. Its glass face was cracked, its needle trembling wildly in every direction. "Elia's," she breathed. Leif's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" She nodded. The compass was worn at the edges, exactly where her father's thumb used to rest. Before she could say more, the needle spun violently and stopped, pointing not north, but straight at the parchment. The map flared. Lines shifted across its surface, coastline bleeding into new shapes, the drowned quarter overlaying itself on the impossible island. For a moment, Myra swore she saw both places at once, the ruins around her, and layered over them, cliffs and forests glimmering with mist. Leif stumbled back. "Tell me I'm not seeing that." "You are," Myra whispered. "It's a bridge." The air thickened, heavy with the smell of ozone, as though a storm were pressing down. The fountain water began to glow faintly, spiraling inward toward a point Myra couldn't see. Then the vision snapped shut. The map fell still, its ink drying into silence. Myra swayed, clutching the compass. Leif grabbed her arm. "Enough. This isn't discovery, it's madness. You think Elias vanished because of me, because of the council. No, he followed this madness, and it swallowed him." Myra pulled away, voice raw. "If it swallowed him, then I'll drag him back out." The words hung sharp in the night air. For a moment, neither moved. The tide sloshed against stone. The lantern flickered. Then Leif cursed softly and looked away. "You're impossible." "Maybe," she said, tucking the compass into her pocket. "But I'm right." They made their way back through the drowned streets in silence, the map hidden once more in her satchel. The glow had faded, but Myra felt its pulse like a second heartbeat against her hip. At the seawall's edge, Leif finally spoke. "If you keep chasing this, Myra, I can't follow you." She looked at him, lantern light catching the lines of exhaustion on his face. "Then don't." But her chest ached as she said it. He shook his head, muttered something she couldn't hear, and strode into the night. Myra stood alone by the wall, compass trembling in her hand, the tide pounding below like a drum. She looked once more at the drowned quarter. For an instant, she thought she saw lights moving among the ruins, lanterns bobbing where no one lived. Then the vision winked out, leaving only the sea. That night, as she sketched the fountain and the impossible overlay in her notebook, a thought refused to leave her mind. The map wasn't just showing her what was lost. It was asking her to choose what could still be found. Chapter 5. The Council's Reckoning. The council chamber smelled of mildew and dust. Myra had always thought the building resembled a stranded ship. Wooden beams creaking in the wind, lanterns swinging overhead, the tide gnawing at its foundations. Tonight, the chamber was packed. Farmers from the higher terraces, fishermen from the piers, a scattering of merchants clinging to what business remained, all crammed shoulder to shoulder on the benches. Faces were hollow, sunken from salt and worry. At the long table on the dais sat 6 counselors, robes patched and damp at the hem. Behind them, the council banner drooped, its colors bleached pale by sea air. Leif stood near the side wall in his surveyor's vest, arms folded, eyes scanning the crowd. When his gaze brushed Myra's, it lingered a moment, something unspoken there before he looked away. The chairwoman, Dagna Roll, raised a hand for silence. Her voice was gravel over stone. "Once again we meet to decide the fate of this town. Once again the tide rises, the walls crack, the quarter drowns. And once again we face the same question. Do we abandon these foundations or cling to them until the sea claims us all?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. "We have stores enough for 2 months. Another counselor, Arvid, interjected. 3 if rations hold. But after that, nothing grows." A farmer cut in from the benches. His voice was raw. "Soil's salt poisoned. My fields are ghosts." The room buzzed louder. Dagna slammed her gavel. "Silence. Each side will speak, as always." One counselor rose, gaunt and hawk-eyed. "We must leave. The sea will not bargain. Relocation is survival." Another sprang up in rebuttal. "Leave. To what? Higher ground is barren stone. Our nets feed us only here. To abandon the coast is to abandon life itself." Shouts erupted. "Stay. Leave. Traitors." The chamber roared like the tide. Myra's hands clenched on her sketchbook. She knew the debate by heart. It had been rehearsed for months, years. But tonight the sound grated more sharply than ever. Because for the first time, she carried proof that the drowned town might not be what it seemed. The compass throbbed faintly in her pocket, as if alive. When the noise subsided, Dagna's voice cut like steel. Relocation requires a 2/3 vote. We have never reached it. Shall we try again? Leif shifted against the wall, his face unreadable. Myra's chest tightened. He would vote with Dagna, he always did. Loyal, practical, unyielding. The councillors cast their tokens into the iron bowl. Dagna shook it, then tipped it onto the table. The tally clerk called out the count. 3 for leaving, 3 against. Deadlock. The chamber erupted again, half the crowd cheering, half cursing. Dagna slammed her gavel so hard the head cracked. Enough. If we cannot choose, the sea will choose for us. Her words rang through the chamber, chilling Myra's blood. When the session broke, Myra pushed toward the exit. She needed air. She needed the tide's roar to drown the voices still echoing in her head. But halfway down the corridor, Leif caught up. You looked ready to shout something back there, he said quietly. I should have, Myra muttered. What would you have said? She hesitated, glancing at the faces streaming past them. Farmers, fishermen, hollow-eyed children clinging to parents' hands. Could she tell them? Could she show them the map and the compass, reveal that the drowned quarter was more than ruin? They're arguing about leaving, she said instead. But they don't see. Maybe the answer isn't leaving or staying. Leif frowned. Then what? She shook her head, clutching her satchel. Not yet. Myra, his voice softened. I want to believe you, I do. But I saw that map move. I saw the quarter change in your eyes. If you tell them, you'll be feeding fire to a starving mob. Or hope, she whispered. Hope kills as easy as the tide. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, Myra thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he stepped back, retreating into duty once more. You should go home before someone notices what you're carrying, he said. Then he turned down the opposite hall. Myra stood frozen, the weight of the map and compass pressing like stones in her bag. That night, the town stirred with unrest. Lanterns flickered in windows. Arguments spilled into streets. Fists slammed on tables in taverns still clinging to business. The tide was rising higher than forecast. Myra sat at her desk by candlelight, sketching the drowned quarter again, overlaying it with the cliffs and forests she'd glimpsed. Her pencil shook as she drew the fountain twice, once cracked and salt-eaten, once glowing like a beacon. The compass lay on the table, needle trembling. Every so often it jerked, aligning not north, but toward the parchment, as if bound by some unseen magnet. She touched it lightly. The needle steadied, pointing directly at the fountain. Myra's heart thudded. The drowned quarter was no ruin. It was a doorway. Her father had known. He had left her the compass to find it, and if she had the courage to follow, she might yet bring him back. Outside, the siren wailed 3 long bursts this time. Not a drill, but a warning. The tide was breaching the wall. Chapter 6. The Breach. The siren's howl split the night. Myra stumbled from her desk, candle toppling, sketches scattering across the floor. Outside, bells clanged and shouts carried down the streets. The wall, the wall. She grabbed her satchel without thinking, map, compass, sketchbook, all bundled together, and rushed into the chaos. The air reeked of salt and smoke. Lanterns swung wildly as people surged toward higher ground. Mothers clutched children. Fishermen dragged carts piled with nets and tools. Farmers herded goats bleating in terror. Myra shoved through them, fighting against the current toward the seawall. When she reached the ramp, her chest clenched. The wall was broken. A section 20 feet wide had crumbled, spilling into the bay. Water poured through the gap like a beast unchained, churning with debris. Houses nearest the wall were already half submerged, roofs vanishing beneath froth. Men and women in oilskins scrambled along the wall with ropes and boards, shouting orders lost in the roar. The tide didn't care. It kept rushing, climbing, devouring. Myra. She turned. Leif was on the ramp, face slick with rain or spray, waving her down. Get back, it's not safe. But Myra was transfixed. The water pouring through the breach moved wrong, not just chaotic, but patterned, spiraling like the symbol on the map. Her satchel throbbed against her side. She fumbled the compass free. Its needle spun madly, then locked, pointing directly at the breach. Her breath hitched. Leif saw the compass, saw her face, and cursed. He shoved through the workers and seized her arm. Don't. Whatever you think is there, it's death. It's him, Myra whispered. It's calling. Leif shook her hard. Myra, look. He forced her gaze to the flood. A fisherman was swept from the wall, swallowed in seconds. A house collapsed into splinters. Children screamed from the terraces. This isn't a riddle, Leif said. It's drowning. But Myra couldn't shake the spiral. The way the water swirled like the map's lines, as though the breach were more than collapse, more than failure. It was a door. The council scrambled into the square, Dagna at their head, voice cutting through the chaos. Evacuate to the cliffs. Take nothing that slows you. Crowds surged uphill. Lanterns flickered like fireflies against the storm. Leif turned Myra toward them, shoving her forward. Go, now. I can't, she said. You will. She twisted free. You don't understand. If this is what he found, if this is what he crossed, then the only way to know is to follow. Leif's face was thunder, and drown with him. Her chest heaved. She wanted to scream, to beg him to see, but the roar of water swallowed her words. The wall groaned. Another section crumbled, sending a fresh torrent surging into the town. The compass needle pulsed faintly, glowing in the lantern light. Myra fled, but not uphill. She slipped sideways into the alleys, heart pounding, feet splashing through rising water. Voices shouted behind her, but the storm drowned them out. Every turn seemed to draw her closer to the drowned quarter. The map in her satchel grew warm, as though alive. When she burst into the square with the fountain, the water was already waist deep. The statue's marble face glistened with spray, eyes blind and pitiless. The spiral was here. She could feel it. Myra hauled herself onto the fountain's rim, clutching the compass. Its needle quivered, then stilled, pointing straight down into the water. She leaned over. The depths shimmered faintly, not with reflected lanterns, but with light that seemed to burn beneath the flood itself. A doorway. Her throat tightened. Father. Myra. She whipped around. Leif was wading through the torrent, face grim, water up to his chest. He shoved through debris, arms outstretched. Don't you dare. You followed me. Of course I did, he snapped. Someone has to keep you alive. Then come with me, her voice shook. Don't you see? This is why he vanished. This is where he went. Leif's eyes burned. Or it's what killed him. The wall groaned again. A surge slammed into the square, nearly sweeping him under. He staggered, cursing, grabbing the fountain's edge to stay upright. Myra, please, his voice broke. Stay with me. She looked at him, water churning between them, compass glowing in her hand. She thought of her father's unfinished stories, the sketches left behind, the words scrawled in his hand. Home. And she thought of Leif, steadfast, stubborn. His hand gripping the fountain like it was the last anchor left. The water glowed brighter. The spiral was opening. Myra's choice loomed like a cliff edge. The square shook. A roar tore through the air, louder than the siren, louder than the sea. Water surged upward in a column, spinning, luminous, forming a vortex that swallowed the fountain whole. Debris spun around it like stars in orbit. Leif shouted something, lost to the storm. Myra's pulse hammered. Compass, map, storm, flood, all pulling, all demanding. She leaned forward. The world tilted, and the water swallowed her. The last thing she heard was Leif's voice, raw and breaking. Myra. Then the light closed over her head. Chapter 7. The Drowned Threshold. The square was gone. Leif clung to the fountain's edge as the surge ripped past, nearly tearing his arms from their sockets. He gasped for air, salt and mud in his mouth, the roar of water pressing on his skull. Myra. No answer. Just the churn, the spiral, the impossible glow beneath the waves. For a heartbeat, he saw her, the flicker of her cloak, her hair spread like seaweed as she vanished into the light. Then she was gone, swallowed. Leif's grip faltered. He hauled himself higher, chest heaving, scanning the torrent. No sign, no body. Around him, the town unraveled. Roofs tore loose. A boat smashed through the square, splintering against the council hall. Lanterns sputtered out, one by one, until only the vortex lit the night. Dagna's voice carried faintly from the terraces. Pull back, pull back. The council fled. Families streamed uphill. The seawall collapsed in another thunderous groan. But Leif stayed rooted, knuckles white on the stone. She was gone. His chest burned with rage at Myra's stubbornness, at his own helplessness, at the sea itself. Yet, beneath it all was a hollowness deeper than grief, as if something had been cut from him. The spiral roared, a light like a wound in the world. And then, as suddenly as it had risen, the vortex sank. The glow bled away. The water stilled into a black mirror, littered with wreckage. The doorway had closed. Leif stared into the dark, throat raw, whispering her name. The world tipped. Myra tumbled through cold and light, lungs burning, limbs flailing. It wasn't drowning. Not exactly. The water seemed endless, but also thin, like falling through liquid air. Her compass spun in her grip, glowing brighter than ever, until it burst into shards of light and scattered. Her satchel dragged at her shoulder. She clutched it tight, afraid it too would dissolve. Then her feet struck ground. She staggered, coughing, hair plastered to her face. She was standing in shallow water, not the roaring flood of the town, but a still, glassy pool that rippled outward from her steps. She looked up. The world was wrong. A pale sky arched overhead, neither day nor night, suffused with shifting hues like dawn and dusk layered together. The air hummed faintly, alive with vibrations she felt in her teeth. Around her stretched a vast shore of stone, smooth, spiraled, carved by no hand she knew. Colossal pillars jutted from the surf, each etched with the same world symbols as her father's map. The pool behind her shimmered, glowing faintly like a mirror. For a heartbeat, she saw Leif's face in its surface, stricken, desperate. She reached out, fingers brushing water. The vision fractured, vanished. The doorway was gone. Her knees buckled. She sank to the ground, trembling, breath ragged. For the first time since the siren, she let herself weep, not just for fear, not just for loss, but for Leif. His cry still rang in her skull. She had left him behind, but the map burned in her satchel. She pulled it free. Its lines had shifted, no longer cryptic sketches, but a clear design. A spiral leading inland, toward a vast shadow rising on the horizon. A mountain. Her father's handwriting glowed faintly along its base. Here, the truth begins. Myra wiped her face with shaking hands. She wasn't lost. She was exactly where he had gone, and she would follow. The air thickened as she walked. Each step echoed strangely, as though the world itself listened. The spiral road unfurled beneath her feet, stone paths winding in impossible curves, pulling her deeper into the island's heart. Strange trees rose along the slopes, their trunks translucent, their leaves refracting light like stained glass. Birds with too many wings wheeled overhead, crying notes that bent into harmonies. The island breathed. She could feel it. At last, she crested a ridge. The mountain loomed before her, vast and jagged, crowned in stormlight. At its base lay ruins, arches and stairways half buried in stone, carved with spirals that seemed to pulse faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. A thrill shot through her chest. This was no accident, no madness. Her father had found this place. He had walked these stones. She gripped the map tighter. "I'll finish it," she whispered, "for you." The wind carried her words upward, as if the mountain itself listened. But in the distance, beneath the strange cries of the birds, another sound stirred. Footsteps. Myra froze. The ruins were not empty. Chapter 8. Echoes and Strangers. The dawn that followed was thin and gray. Leif stood on the cliff above the drowned quarter, smoke and mist mingling in the air. The town below was unrecognizable streets, now canals, houses broken into rafts of splinters. The seawall lay in ruin, jagged teeth pointing uselessly into the tide. Survivors huddled on the terraces, wrapped in soaked blankets, faces hollow. Children whimpered. Elders stared at the sea with eyes that held no tears left. The council moved among them, counting, consoling, commanding. Dagna's voice carried sharp and sure, but her hands trembled when she thought no one watched. Leif barely heard her. His ears still rang with Myra's name, shouted into the storm. He had told them, told anyone who would listen, that she was swept away in the surge. It was true enough. No one questioned it. Some murmured prayers. A few muttered that the sea had claimed another dreamer. But he had seen the light. He had seen her vanish into it. And he could not decide which was worse, that she had drowned, or that she had gone somewhere he could not follow. A boy tugged at his sleeve. One of the fisher sons, wide-eyed. "Master Leif, will the wall be mended?" Leif's throat closed. He wanted to say yes, that the council would rebuild, that life would continue. Instead, he knelt, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll hold," he said softly. "We always do." But in his heart, doubt gnawed. The breach was more than stone collapsing. It had opened to something else, and Myra had chosen it. Far away, Myra climbed the ruins. The spiral road had led her to a terrace of broken arches, their stone veined with light like molten rivers trapped beneath the surface. Each step hummed faintly, as if recognizing her presence. She kept one hand on the map, now alive with shifting lines that redrew themselves with every turn. The spiral always pointed ahead, toward the mountain's heart. The air here smelled of ozone and salt, tinged with something sweet, like blossoms she could not see. Her chest ached with wonder and unease, because she was no longer alone. At first, it was only the sensation of being watched, hair rising on her neck, pulse quickening. Then came the sound, a soft tread, careful but not hidden. She stopped in a half-collapsed hall, shadows pooling between the broken pillars. I know you're there, she said, voice trembling. Show yourself. For a heartbeat, silence, then movement. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, cloaked, face half veiled by a mask of bone. The mask was carved with spirals that glowed faintly, echoing the ruins themselves. Myra's breath caught. The figure tilted its head. When it spoke, the voice was layered 2 tones at once, one human, one resonant, as though the stone itself spoke through it. You carry the map. Myra clutched the satchel tighter. Who are you? The figure ignored the question. Its eyes glimmered behind the mask, not unkind, but unreadable. Long has the path lain closed. Now a child of the drowned shore walks it again. Her throat dried. My father, did he come here? Years ago. The figure stepped closer. Its cloak shifted, revealing skin that shimmered faintly, as though scaled with light. Many have crossed. Few remain. Fewer still return. Myra's chest hammered. Then tell me where he is. The masked head tilted again, bird-like. Answers are not given. They are found. The mountain holds them if you endure. It extended a hand, long-fingered, veined with light. Come. Myra hesitated. Everything in her warned against trust. But the map pulsed in her hand, glowing brighter, as though urging her forward. Slowly she reached out. The figure's hand was cool, steady, not hostile, not entirely human. I will guide you, it said. But the path you seek demands more than courage. It demands loss. Myra swallowed hard, the memory of Leif's voice stabbing her chest. She tightened her grip. I've already lost. The figure inclined its head, as though recognizing truth. Then it turned, cloak sweeping, and led her deeper into the ruins. Back on the cliffs, Leif watched the tide swallow the last lantern of the lower town. And though he told himself Myra was gone, some part of him whispered she was not lost at all. Chapter 9. The Spiral Divides. The ruins swallowed Myra and her guide. Stone arches twisted overhead, veined with light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The masked figure moved with calm assurance, never hesitating, as though the labyrinth of spirals was as familiar as breath. Myra kept close, clutching the map. Its lines redrew themselves with every turn, shifting to match the corridors they walked. Sometimes it led ahead. Sometimes it whispered of doors hidden in walls, of stairways buried beneath rubble. The guide's voice, when it came, was low and resonant. The mountain is not stone alone. It remembers. Each who enters leaves a mark. Then my father. His mark is here. Her chest tightened. You've seen him. The mask tilted. Seen, perhaps known, no. Frustration surged, but she bit it back. The truth lay ahead. She had to endure. On the cliffs, Leif sat apart from the others. The council had convened beneath a canvas, rigged from torn sails, their voices sharp against the wind. We cannot rebuild the wall at once, Dagna said, packing. Our stores are ruined. We must ration. Evacuate if the sea pushes further inland. Evacuate where? Another counselor snapped. The highlands are barren. The river valley is too far. We will endure. Dagna insisted. We always endure. Leif stared at the horizon. We always endure. He had said the same to a boy that morning. The words tasted hollow. A fisherman approached him quietly. I saw you last night, the man muttered. At the fountain. You shouted her name. Leif's shoulders stiffened. She was swept into the breach, was she? The fisherman pressed. His eyes glinted with unease. Or did you see something else? Leif's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it, to call it madness. But memory burned too vivid, the spiral, the light, Myra's vanishing. Go back to your family, he said harshly. The fisherman hesitated, then left. But the whisper would spread. Myra's legs ached as they climbed a staircase, spiraling upward into a vast chamber. The roof opened into sky, not the pale dawn sky she had seen before, but a vault of stars unfamiliar and wrong, constellations wheeling in strange patterns. She gasped, It's night. It is both, the guide said. Here the world is layered. Sky upon sky, tide upon tide. Myra turned slowly, wonder and fear colliding in her chest. The guide stopped before a broken altar. Spirals glowed across its surface, lines sinking deep into stone. It turned to her. Each who enters leaves an offering. To walk further, you must leave yours. Her pulse quickened. What kind of offering? The layered voice echoed. Something you cannot reclaim. She thought of her father's compass, shattered in the crossing. She thought of Leif's hand, reaching for her as the water closed. Her satchel weighed heavy on her shoulder. Leif's hands were raw from hauling wreckage when Dagna found him. You're quiet, she said. Not accusation, not kindness, simply fact. There's little worth saying. Her gaze was sharp. The people look to you. They think of you as steady. Don't prove them wrong. Leif almost laughed. Steady. He had shouted Myra's name until his throat tore. He had watched her vanish into a light no one else saw. Tell me straight, he said. Do you think we can hold? Dagna's silence was long. Finally, she said, if the wall was broken by stone and tide, yes. If by something else, her voice faltered, then no wall will stand. She left him with that. Leif stared out at the sea, cold certainty coiling in his gut. The breach was not stone alone. Myra placed her father's map on the altar. The stone drank its glow, spirals brightening, lines shifting until they burned into the altar itself. The parchment went blank in her hands. Her breath caught. No, it is not lost, the guide said softly. It is part of the path now, carried within the mountain. Myra's hands shook. The map had been her anchor, her only tether to her father. Now it was gone. The guide's masked face regarded her. You endure. A stair opened in the altar side, spiraling downward. Myra clutched the blank parchment to her chest, fighting tears. Then take me to him. The guide only turned and descended. That night, Leif dreamt of spirals. They rose in the sea foam, etched in the cliffs, carved in the clouds. Myra's face appeared within them, eyes alight, mouth forming a word he could not hear. He woke gasping, the surf pounding in his ears. The breach was glowing faintly. He stumbled to the cliff's edge. In the moonlight, the water churned with a spiral of pale fire. Not as bright as the night before, but real. He gripped the railing, chest heaving. Myra was not gone. Chapter 10, Thresholds. Myra. The stairway spiraled downward like the inside of a seashell, its walls pulsing with veins of faint blue light. Each step exhaled a soft sigh beneath Myra's boots, as if the mountain itself were breathing her deeper into its heart. Her guide's cloak brushed the stone in a whisper. "Do not linger," the layered voice said. "The mountain remembers every hesitation." Myra's fingers traced the wall despite the warning. Warm, almost living. She felt tiny vibrations, like a heartbeat buried inside the rock. "How far?" she asked. "Farther than distance." She bit back a retort. The map was gone. Only this cryptic being stood between her and the truth. The stair opened into a cavern vast enough to house the drowned town above. Columns of crystal rose like frozen waves, each etched with spirals that glowed faintly. Pools of dark water dotted the floor, their surfaces trembling as though stirred by invisible currents. Myra stopped short. At the cavern's center lay a camp tattered canvas, rusted lanterns, a scatter of notebooks sealed in waxed leather. Her heart leapt. She knew those notebooks. She dropped to her knees, hands shaking as she lifted one. The wax cracked beneath her fingers, releasing the faint scent of salt and ink. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, sketches of the spiral road, notes in his hurried scrawl. He was here. Her throat tightened. "Where is he now?" she whispered. The guide stood silent. Only the mountain answered, a low hum that resonated in her bones. Leif. The survivors gathered around driftwood fires on the high terrace, their faces hollowed by exhaustion. Dagna moved from group to group, issuing orders for rationing and salvage. Leif stood apart, staring at the breach. Moonlight silvered the wreckage. The faint spiral of pale fire still churned on the water, small but steady. He felt it in his chest, a pull that was not merely curiosity. The fisherman from the day before approached again, voice low. "It's not natural, that light." Leif didn't answer. "You saw something," the man pressed. "Tell us." Leif turned sharply. "You think knowledge will keep the tide back." The man flinched, but didn't retreat. "If the sea wants us gone, we should know why." Leif looked back at the glow. His jaw tightened. "Then watch, and pray it stays closed." But even as he said it, he knew he would not simply watch. Myra. She devoured her father's notes by lantern light. He had mapped the descent with careful precision, sketches of chambers, symbols, even fragments of a language etched into the stone. But the final pages broke into frantic lines. The door calls. Loss is the key. Light below is not light. The writing ended mid-sentence. Myra's pulse raced. Where did he go after this? The guide finally spoke. Deeper, few return. I have to follow. The masked head inclined slightly. Then you must leave more behind. I already gave the map. Maps are paper. The mountain demands memory. Her stomach nodded. What does that mean? Something you carry inside. A weight that holds you to the shore. Leif's face rose in her mind, his shout, his hand reaching. The warmth of nights spent arguing over charts. The guide watched her silently, as if reading the battle behind her eyes. Leif, the council finally dispersed, fires dimming to embers. Dagna approached him, cloak snapping in the wind. You're restless, she said. The breach, he answered. It hasn't closed, nor widened. Not yet. Dagna studied him a long moment. You believe she lives? The statement cut deeper than a question. Leif said nothing. I can't spare men for a fool's chase, Dagna continued. But if you go, take only what you can carry. And know you may not return. Leif met her gaze. If there's a chance, I have to try. She nodded once, brisk. Then go before dawn. The tide turns strongest at first light. Myra, the guide's masked face remained still. What will you release? Myra closed her eyes. The image of Leif sharpened his stubborn kindness, the way he steadied her when the world tilted. She felt the ache of his absence like a physical weight. To let go meant forgetting. No, she whispered, not him. The guide's voice was gentle, almost sad. Then the path stays closed. Myra gripped the notebook to her chest. There must be another way. Silence. Only the slow hum of the mountain, like a heartbeat waiting. Leif, before dawn, he stood at the cliff's edge, pack slung across his back. The spiral glow brightened as the tide swelled, opening into a faint whirlpool. The fisherman who had questioned him watched from the rocks. You'll drown, the man said. Maybe, Leif replied. He tightened the straps, drew a steadying breath, and stepped toward the light. The sea accepted him without a splash. Myra, the hum of the mountain deepened suddenly, vibrating through the floor. The guide turned sharply toward the upper stair. What is it? Myra asked. Another enters. Myra's heart lurched. My father. The mask tilted, listening. No, someone closer. A ripple of pale light spilled across the cavern ceiling, spiraling downward. Myra's breath caught. Against all reason, she knew. Leif, she whispered. Chapter 9, Parallel Currents. Myra. The island twisted under her feet as if it were alive. Pathways shifting when she dared to blink. She gripped the map tightly, but even its half-drawn lines seemed to slither away from her comprehension. At the water's edge, she encountered a figure tall, cloaked in woven reeds, eyes shimmering like mercury. You carry a broken atlas, the figure said, voice rippling like wind over glass. Each page remembers something your world forgot. Myra's throat tightened. Do you know my father? The figure tilted its head. He came before. He sought truth, but feared what it would cost. Before she could press further, the ground cracked open. A surge of water rushed upward, forming a wall that hissed with words she almost understood. She stepped back, realizing it wasn't just water. It was memory made liquid. Pass through, the reed-cloaked one said, or remain unmarked by the current and lose what you came for. Myra hesitated. To step forward meant risking herself, her mind, maybe even her memories of Elia's. Leif, the town was breaking. Waves had clawed through the seawall, dragging away homes like toys. Leif shouted orders, hauling children onto rooftops, guiding the elderly toward the high road. But survival was not the only battle. The company's machines, cranes, pumps, armored trucks still thundered beyond the barricade, gouging deeper into the land, even as it drowned. One of the survivors, a wiry woman with storm-gray eyes, spat into the mud. They'd let us die for stone and numbers. Why fight the sea when we've got them bleeding us dry? Leif clenched his jaw. The truth of it stung. He thought of Myra somewhere out there, chasing riddles. Was her quest madness, or their only chance? Another wave slammed against the broken wall, snapping a lamppost like straw. He grabbed a child, pressing the boy into his mother's arms. We'll hold, Leif muttered. But in his heart, he wondered if he was lying to them or to himself. Myra, she pressed a hand to her chest, inhaled, and stepped into the wall of water memory. It burned cold, flooding her senses with flashes not her own, faces of the drowned, fragments of songs, whole villages swallowed in silence. She staggered, but forced herself onward, each step dissolving another boundary inside her. On the other side, she collapsed to her knees, gasping. The reed-cloaked figure was gone. In its place lay a settlement unlike anything she'd imagined. Homes woven of coral and bone, pathways glowing faintly beneath an unearthly sky. And waiting at the edge of the settlement was another figure. This one different, skin translucent, as if light itself ran in their veins. You're late, the being said, voice both kind and stern. Your father promised us more time. Leif, from the rooftop, Leif looked back at the town. Fires burned where the water hadn't yet claimed. He saw the company trucks retreat, not from pity, but because even they could not master the storm. And yet his heart thrummed with defiance. If Myra was chasing some hidden truth, then maybe he was meant to hold the line until she returned with it. The seawall groaned, stones splitting like old bones. Hold fast, he roared, as if words alone could stitch the world together. Chapter 10, Echoes and Ruins. Myra, the translucent being, led her along a glowing path that curved through coral arches and bone-white towers. The air shimmered faintly, carrying scents that shifted with every breath: salt, smoke, flowers, decay. Where are we? Myra whispered. The being didn't answer at first. Instead, they placed a hand on the wall of a coral dwelling. The structure pulsed faintly, like a heart. This is the echo of what was, they said. The island exists because memory demands it. When your kind forgets, we fade. When your kind remembers, we return. We are made from what was taken away. Myra's chest tightened. And my father, he found this place. He did, but truth cuts both ways. He sought answers and paid the price of knowing. They stopped before a darkened chamber, its entrance woven with seaweed that glistened like glass. Inside, the being said, you will face what he faced. If you turn away, the atlas will remain incomplete. Myra hesitated at the threshold. The map pulsed faintly in her satchel, as if urging her forward. She stepped inside. At first, it was only darkness. Then a voice rose from the black, warm, familiar. Myra. Her breath caught. It was her father's voice. She turned, and there he was, Elias, seated at a desk covered in maps, head bent, pen scratching furiously. Father, he lifted his head, smiling in that distracted way she remembered. But his eyes were different. Cold, hollow. You shouldn't have come, he said. Myra moved closer. I need to know the truth about the atlas, about you. His expression hardened. Truth. The truth devoured me. It will devour you. I left to protect you. I left because you weren't strong enough. The words struck like blows. Myra's hands trembled. She wanted to scream at him, deny it, but part of her wondered if this was what he truly believed. The shadows around him deepened, rising like water. Choose, his hollow voice echoed. Follow me into the depths, or abandon me and face the surface alone. Her heart pounded. Was this him, or the trial? She clenched her fists. I won't follow you into silence, she whispered. And I won't abandon myself. The vision cracked like glass. Darkness shattered into light. When Myra blinked, she was alone again, kneeling in the chamber. But the map in her satchel had changed. A new line had appeared, glowing faintly, pointing deeper into the impossible island. Leif, the town was unraveling. Leif staggered through streets half drowned in brackish water, carrying a lantern high. Around him, survivors argued in clumps, voices sharp with fear. We should head inland before the next surge. Someone shouted. No, another barked. This is our home. The sea will pass. It always does. Children cried in the arms of exhausted mothers. Elderly men stared blankly at ruined doorways, too stunned to move. Leif raised his voice. Listen to me. If we stay divided, we'll all be lost. We need to decide together. A wiry fisherman with salt in his beard spat at the ground. Easy for you to say. You've got strength to climb. What about those who can't walk the ridge? A younger man snarled. Then leave them. The sea won't wait for pity. The crowd erupted. Leif's stomach twisted. He saw both sides, He had carried the weak himself, felt their weight slowing every desperate climb. But to abandon them, that was no survival. That was surrender to cruelty. Enough, he bellowed, slamming his lantern down on a stone step. The glass cracked, but the flame inside still burned. If we break apart now, the sea wins before it even drowns us. We move together, or we don't move at all. For a moment, silence. Only the hiss of waves grinding against shattered wood. Then the gray-eyed woman from before stepped forward. "And if some refuse?" she asked. Leif's throat went dry. He looked at the crowd, their faces carved from fear and pride, suspicion and desperation. "Then I'll carry them," he said finally. "One by one if I have to, but I won't leave them." The fisherman muttered, but the edge of resistance dulled. Slowly, the group began to settle, torn between doubt and weary trust. Leif lifted the cracked lantern again. Its flame flickered, stubborn as his resolve. The seawall groaned somewhere in the darkness, stones splitting like bones. They didn't have long. Chapter 11. The Bargain of Shadows. Myra, the translucent being, waited for her outside the chamber, watching as she emerged pale and shaking. "You passed," they said softly. "But the island demands more than courage. It demands payment." Myra frowned. "Payment." They gestured to the atlas in her satchel. "That map grows only when memory is surrendered. Each path forward requires something of you." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean, surrendered?" The beings stepped closer. Their skin glowed faintly, as if veins of light ran beneath it. "To unlock the next path, you must yield a memory. It will be gone forever. The island will keep it. In return, the atlas will reveal what your father sought." Myra's pulse hammered. Her whole life was already full of holes left by his absence. Could she bear to give more away? "What if I refuse?" she asked. "Then the path ends here, and so does your chance to know." She pulled the atlas from her satchel. Its lines glowed faintly, as though hungry. She thought of Elias, of his laugh, rough and warm when he scooped her onto his shoulders. That laugh had carried her through years of silence. Her throat constricted. If she gave it up, she might never hear it again. The being's voice pressed like tide against her ear. "Every cartographer leaves something behind. Every truth has a cost." Her hands shook. Tears burned hot at the corners of her eyes. But slowly she whispered, "Take it." A chill swept through her. She gasped as a thread of warmth pulled from her chest, dissolving into the air. For a moment, she reached, trying to grasp what was slipping away, but it was gone. The memory of Elias' laugh was a hollow echo, a blank she could not fill. The atlas blazed. New lines etched themselves across the page, leading her deeper into the impossible island. Myra staggered, clutching her chest. "Father," she whispered, but the word felt thinner, emptier. The translucent being watched with something like sorrow. "The more you seek, the more you lose. Be sure the end is worth the fragments." Leif, The storm had not relented. Rain lashed the ruined town, turning streets into rivers. Leif stumbled through the water, lantern flickering, searching for the trapped family he had sworn to save. He found them at last, a mother and her 2 children, cornered in a collapsed house, water rising fast around their legs. Leif, the mother cried, "We can't get out." He waded to them, shoving aside beams, hauling bricks with bleeding hands. The children clung to him as he pulled them free one by one. His muscles screamed, but he forced himself to lift the mother last, carrying her across the flood to higher ground. By the time he set them down, his body shook with exhaustion. "Go with the others," he told her. "Stay together." But even as relief swept through him, a deep roar echoed across the drowned town. He turned and saw the company's machines. Floodlights cut through the rain, illuminating armored trucks and heavy drills rolling back into the ruins. "What in God's name?" he muttered. Then he understood. They weren't here to save. They were here to erase. The storm was cover, an excuse to grind the town into mud, to obliterate evidence of what they'd done. Fury burned hot in his chest. He had 2 choices: protect the survivors already fleeing to the ridge, or strike at the machines, sabotage them before they tore away what little was left. One path meant safety for his people. The other meant vengeance, maybe justice. Leif clenched his fists, rain streaming down his face. He could almost hear Myra's voice in his head, though he knew it was only his own conscience asking him which oath mattered more, to protect or to resist. His hand tightened around the cracked lantern. He knew he couldn't do both. Chapter 12. Diverging Currents. Myra. The settlement spread out before her like a dream unraveling. Homes of coral and bone leaned together, lit by faintly glowing veins that pulsed with unseen life. Everywhere she looked, fragments of memory shimmered on the air, faces, songs, storms, flashes not her own. The translucent being guided her to the heart of the settlement, where a vast hall rose, its walls shaped from glassy tide. Images flickered across its surface, villages drowned, forests erased, children whose names she did not know. "This is the archive of what was," the being said. "Every story lost to the sea lingers here. Your father walked these halls. He did not walk them alone." Myra touched the glassy wall. Her hand came away wet, though no water clung to her skin. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because the atlas cannot be complete until you walk the corridor." She frowned. "Corridor." The being pointed. At the far end of the hall, a passage stretched away, lined with mirrors that shimmered faintly in the dim light. "Each reflection shows a life unchosen," they explained. "Paths you might have walked, selves you might have been. To reach the next fragment, you must walk forward without turning back. If you falter, if you choose to cling to what might have been, you will remain here forever." Myra's heart thudded. She stepped to the threshold, catching sight of her reflection. But it wasn't her not exactly. This Myra wore a professor's robes, chalk on her hands, smiling at a lecture hall of eager faces. Another step, another mirror. This Myra stood on a boat with Elias, laughing, whole and happy, never abandoned. Her knees weakened, her chest ached. The temptation was crushing. The Atlas pulsed at her side, urging her onward. Leif, the storm churned harder, tearing the town apart piece by piece. Survivors pressed inland, their torches flickering on the ridge. But Leif did not follow them. He stood in the rain, staring down the company's machines. Floodlights glared, blinding him. Drills tore into the broken ground, crushing beams, ripping walls as if eager to erase even the memory of the town. One of the armored trucks groaned forward, its treads grinding over the cobblestones of the square. Leif clenched his jaw. He couldn't save everyone. Not anymore. But maybe, just maybe, he could strike at the ones who had made this suffering worse. He ran, body heavy with exhaustion, heart pounding with rage. Rain slicked his hands as he grabbed a fallen length of pipe. With a roar, he slammed it into the side of the nearest machine. Sparks flared. A driver shouted from inside the cab, the engine coughing and choking. The truck veered, crashing into another. Metal shrieked, lights went dark. For a moment, Leif's fury drowned the storm itself, but floodlights swung toward him, locking on. Voices barked. Shadows moved inside the armored vehicles. He raised the cracked lantern, flames still flickering stubbornly within. "Come then," he growled. "You'll not erase us so easily." Myra. She stumbled past mirror after mirror, each one showing a life more tempting than the last. Myra at a wedding, Elias at her side. Myra with children, safe and smiling. Myra walking away from the town before the flood ever came. Her chest felt as though it would split in two. Every step forward tore at her resolve. "Keep walking," she whispered to herself. "Keep walking." The mirrors began to ripple, their images reaching for her, voices whispering, "Stay. Stay with us. Be whole again." Her knees buckled. She clutched the atlas. Then she remembered Leif's voice, rough and determined. Hold fast. Though he was far away, though she had no proof he still lived, she let the memory of his stubborn strength steady her steps. One more step, then another. The corridor shuddered and then shattered into mist. She fell forward onto solid ground, gasping. The atlas blazed open. New symbols flared across its surface. She had passed, but part of her wondered if she had left behind pieces she would never recover. Chapter 13. Crossing Currents. Leif. The storm had become a living thing, howling with the fury of a predator. Leif crouched behind a toppled wall, chest heaving, watching the company's trucks grind through the ruins. One machine lay crippled where his pipe strike had torn its side open, smoke rising into the rain. A voice carried faintly on the wind, not the bark of men, nor the shriek of metal, but something stranger. a chant, low and melodic, drifting from the sea. Leif frowned, straining to hear. It was like no language he knew, yet it stirred something inside him, as though the very bones of the earth were humming. The floodwater surged higher, swirling around his legs. And then he saw it, a faint glow beneath the black water, a line of light weaving like a vein toward the drowned shoreline. It moved as though alive, drawing his gaze seaward to the place where the seawall had collapsed. For an instant, he thought he saw a figure, small, determined, wadding across that glowing path. Then lightning split the sky, and the vision vanished. Myra, he breathed, though he couldn't be sure. Myra, the corridor of mirrors, was behind her, but its images clung like frost at the edge of her mind. The translucent being had not followed her this time. She walked alone, guided only by the atlas, which pulsed with light brighter than ever before. The ground shifted underfoot, no longer coral, but slick stone, wet with tide. She emerged from the settlement into an open stretch of shore, though it was unlike any coast she remembered. The sea here shimmered with lines of pale fire, glowing currents that carved shapes upon the waves. She stepped closer, watching the light weave and curl, as if sketching patterns only the atlas could read. Then, in the distance, she thought she saw movement, shadows against stormlight, faint and fleeting. A town crumbling, fire and flood entwined. And in that vision, a man with a lantern raised high, defiant against the dark. Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the storm itself was pulling her toward him. Leif, he scrambled higher onto the ridge, dragging the lantern with him. The flames sputtered, threatened to die, and then flared brighter, as if answering the chant from the sea. The survivors huddled close, watching him. "What is it?" the gray-eyed woman asked, her voice taut. Leif shook his head. "I don't know, but I think someone's out there, someone trying to reach us." The flood roared louder, swallowing another street. Yet beneath it, the glow pulsed again, threading through the water like a living vein. And this time he felt certain. It wasn't just stormlight. It was a path. Myra, she placed a hand on the atlas. It was burning hot, light spilling across its surface. The glowing current in the sea pulsed in perfect rhythm with the lines on the page. Somewhere, she knew, someone else was seeing it too. "Father," she whispered, "is this what you meant me to find? A way back or a way forward?" She tightened her grip on the atlas and stepped onto the glowing current. The sea rose to meet her, but the light held her weight. For the first time, the impossible island and the drowning town seemed not separate, but bound by the same current, two halves of one fractured truth. And though she could not see him clearly yet, Myra felt it in her bones. She was not walking alone. Chapter 14. The Meeting at the Fracture. Leif, the ridge was breaking. Water surged over the shattered seawall, swallowing what remained of the streets below. Survivors clung to one another, their eyes wide as the glowing current wove through the flood, poolsing brighter with every wave. Leif raised his lantern, heart hammering. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn toward that light, as if it were calling him by name. Then he saw her, a figure walking the impossible path, steady against the raging tide. Her hair whipped wild in the storm, her eyes fixed on something he could not see. The atlas in her hands glowed as if it were the heart of the sea itself. Leif's throat caught. Myra, Myra. The storm clawed at her, rain stinging like shards of glass. The glowing current trembled beneath her feet, threatening to collapse. She clutched the atlas close, each step a battle. Then she heard it, a voice hoarse, fierce, achingly familiar. Myra. Her head snapped up. Through the storm on the ridge, she saw a lantern blazing like a star. And behind it, a man battered, drenched, but unmistakable. Leif, she cried, her voice almost torn away by the wind. For a heartbeat, the impossible island and the drowning town overlapped. She could see him clearly, every line of exhaustion on his face, every ounce of stubborn fire in his eyes. Leif, he stumbled down the ridge, boots slipping on wet stone, forcing his way toward the collapsing path. Hold on, he shouted, as though sheer command could hold the sea back. Survivors called after him, voices sharp with fear, but he didn't stop. The sight of her alive, burning with determination, was all that mattered. The current cracked beneath her, water rising to swallow the light. No, Leif roared. He plunged forward, extending his free hand. The lantern's flame guttered wildly. Myra. The atlas pulsed violently, pages tearing themselves open in a rush of light. She felt it pulling her toward him, bridging the impossible divide. The path shuddered. She lunged forward, arm outstretched. Her fingers brushed his. For an instant, the world held its breath. Then the current surged, and their hands locked tight. Light exploded around them, a burst that blinded sea, storm, and machine alike. Both, when the light dimmed, they were together, Myra half collapsed against Leif, the atlas clutched between them. The survivors stared in awe. The storm itself seemed to pause, as though the sea were listening. Leif held her close, disbelieving. I thought you were lost. Myra looked up at him, rain streaming down her face. I nearly was, but I found you instead. The atlas throbbed once more, brighter than ever. Its fractured lines no longer seemed random. They were converging, reshaping into something whole. And though the storm roared on, both of them knew the real trial had only just begun. Chapter 15. The Space Between Storms. Myra, for the first time in days, she let herself breathe. Leif's arms were around her, solid, shaking, and real. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, every muscle trembling with the release of carrying too much alone. You're warm, she whispered, surprised. I thought everything here would be cold. Leif gave a small, disbelieving laugh, rough with exhaustion. You vanished into thin air, and that's what you say. He pulled back to study her, lantern glow softening his weathered face. You shouldn't be here, Myra. Not in this. She lifted the atlas between them. I had no choice. It brought me through. The book pulsed faintly, pages humming as though it understood the weight of her words. Leif, he stared at her, at the impossible light bleeding from the cracked atlas. It made his gut twist with both hope and dread. You always follow the maps, he said, almost to himself, even when the rest of us can't read them. She smiled, tired but unbroken. And you always follow the storm. That's how I found you. The words undid him. For so long, he'd carried the town's collapse like a chain on his chest. Seeing her alive, fierce, blazing with purpose, made the chain feel lighter, if only for this fragile moment. Myra, her fingers brushed his wrist, hesitant. Leif, I saw things. The island isn't just land. It breathes, it remembers, and it's angry. He didn't flinch. I know, we felt it here. Every wave, every collapse, it's not just weather. Their eyes locked, both knowing the truth stretched further than either could name. Before Myra could answer, shouts broke through the rain. Survivors gathering, pointing down the slope. The storm wasn't retreating, it was circling, tightening like a predator, preparing another strike. Leif, the moment cracked. He forced himself to stand, pulling Myra up with him. Around them, the people were staring not just at the sea, but at her, at the atlas in her hands. They think you've brought something with you, he said low, almost a warning. Maybe I have, Myra replied, voice taut. She didn't let go of his hand. Over the ridge, a new light appeared, harsh, artificial, unblinking. Search drones, their beams slicing the storm. The company had found them. Leif cursed under his breath. So the game begins. They stood side by side, storm on one side, survivors at their back, the company closing in. The fragile reunion hardened into resolve. Myra tightened her grip on the atlas. Then we play it together. Leif raised his lantern. The flame flared, catching the storm wind and burning brighter. And for a heartbeat, it felt as if the sea itself were waiting to see what they would choose. Chapter 16, Fire in the Rain. Myra, the drones descended like carrion birds, their beams cutting through the storm in sharp white arcs. Rain hissed against their metallic shells, but their engines thrummed steady, unbothered. Myra tightened her grip on the atlas. It burned in her hands, pages fluttering as if trying to break free. There after this, she murmured. Leif's jaw tightened. Then they'll have to get through us. Leif, he shoved the survivors back, barking orders. Stay behind the ridge. Don't scatter, hold the line. The lantern's flame wavered, then surged, feeding on the wind like it knew the fight had come. He raised it high, the light flaring enough to blind the nearest drone. It screeched, course jerking wildly, before correcting and sweeping low. Down, Leif roared. The drone spat a burst of sparks, where he had been standing seconds before, scorching the stone. Myra, she dropped to her knees, atlas open. The ink writhed, symbols reconfiguring themselves faster than she could read. The storm's energy tangled with the drone's beams, refracting into impossible patterns. She pressed her palm to the page. Show me. A line of light tore across the ground, racing toward the oncoming machines. With a crack like thunder, the earth split just enough to send 2 drones spiraling into the floodwaters. The survivors gasped. Leif glanced at her, equal parts awe and fear. What did you just do? Myra's hands shook. I don't know. I just listened. Leif, there was no time to marvel. 3 more drones swarmed, beams sweeping dangerously close to the cowering survivors. Leif charged, lantern blazing. He swung it in an arc, the flame erupting into a sheet of light. The drones recoiled, mechanical shrieks echoing through the storm. But the flame sputtered afterward, dimmer. He gritted his teeth. I can't hold them all. Myra rose beside him, eyes hard. Then we'll hold them together. Both. The atlas flared. The lantern blazed. Light and storm tangled into a shield that rippled outward, forcing the drones back. For one fragile moment, it looked like they might win. Then a deeper hum rolled through the rain. The drones parted, and behind them descended something larger, sleek, black, its lights red as coals. A company hunter craft, built not for scouting but for capture. The survivors whimpered. Myra felt the atlas throb painfully in her hands, as though the book itself recoiled from the machine. Leif's voice was steady, though his grip on the lantern trembled. That's not a scavenger drone. That's them. The ones pulling the strings. Myra's eyes narrowed. Then it's time we cut them. The hunter lowered, claws unfolding, engines shaking the ridge. And the first true battle began. Chapter 17. The hunter descends. The storm bent around it. The hunter wasn't just a machine. It carried a gravity of its own. A shadow that pressed on Myra's chest until every breath was a battle. Its body was black steel, wings folded like blades, and its lights burned a hungry red. The survivors scattered to the edges of the ridge, whimpering. Leif planted himself at Myra's side, lantern raised, but she barely saw him. The atlas pulsed hot against her palms, each throb echoing the hum of the hunter's engines. It wanted her. No, it wanted this. Myra, Leif's voice cut through the roar. Focus. It's after the book. I know, she whispered. Her voice shook. But the book is after it too. The hunter swooped low. Its claws extended, metallic fingers sharp enough to shear through stone. The ridge trembled as one talon slammed down, carving a furrow yards from where Myra stood. She stumbled, nearly falling into the crack. The atlas flared, holding her upright. Words blazed across the open pages in a language she couldn't read. Yet she understood them all the same. Root it, break its rhythm. She slammed her hand to the ground. Light raced outward, latching onto the hunter's shadow. The storm itself seemed to snag it, winds knotting around its frame. The machine bucked, engines whining, wings straining against invisible chains. Leif's flame blazed brighter, feeding the tether. "You've got it," he shouted. But the hunter roared, and with a single violent surge, it tore free. The backlash hit like a tidal wave. Myra flew backward, the atlas ripped from her grip. She hit the ground hard, breath torn from her lungs. Rain blinded her eyes. Somewhere above, the hunter's claws snapped shut around the atlas, lifting it from the stone. No. Myra staggered to her feet, blood on her lip, vision spinning. The survivors screamed as the machine climbed higher, pages of the atlas tearing loose and scattering like burning leaves into the storm. Without thinking, she leapt forward, catching a single glowing page before it vanished into the flood. The words burned into her skin, alive, demanding. One path left. Myra looked up at the hunter. It had the atlas, but she had this. The page pulsed, and beneath the storm's roar she heard it, a second hum, deep and furious. The sea itself answering. Myra, Leif's voice was far behind her now. "Don't." She raised the page high. The ocean rose. Chapter 18. The Sea Remembers. The page burned like fire in Myra's hand, yet it didn't consume her. The storm bent toward her instead, wind and wave pulling in sync with her heartbeat. The hunter shrieked overhead, its red lights blazing as it clutched the atlas tighter. Its engines roared against the pull of the sea, but the ocean was no longer passive. It rose, cresting into a wall of water that towered above the ridge. Myra, Leif's voice tore across the chaos. He was running toward her, lantern blazing like a lone star in the storm. "Stop before it takes you too." But she couldn't. The page's command echoed in her bones. One path left, end the rhythm. The wave came down like judgment. The hunter veered upward, claws tightening around the atlas, but the ocean's strike was merciless. Water slammed into steel with a sound like mountains breaking. The craft staggered, wings twisting, its red lights flickering. Sparks cascaded into the flood. Myra stumbled to her knees, the force of the storm dragging at her body. The page disintegrated in her hand, leaving only glowing ash that dissolved into the rain. For a moment, silence. The hunter sagged in the air, crippled, its claws forced open. The atlas tumbled free, pages scattering like stars. Myra screamed, leaping forward as the book fell. Her fingers closed around its sodden cover just before it hit the rushing current. The impact nearly pulled her under, but she clung to it with everything left in her. Behind her, the hunter convulsed. Its engines shrieked, systems failing, but it wasn't finished. With a last desperate surge, it lunged low, claws outstretched, not for the book, but for her. Myra. Leif's lantern flared. He dove between them, flame colliding with metal in a burst of light and sparks. The claw recoiled, scorched, and the hunter howled, reeling back into the rain. It rose unsteadily, smoke trailing from its frame. And then, with one last piercing shriek, it retreated into the clouds, vanishing into the storm. Myra collapsed against Leif, the atlas clutched tight to her chest. Her body shook, her breath ragged, but she was alive. You, Leif's voice was hoarse, furious, and awed all at once. You called the sea. I saw it answer you. She could barely speak. It remembered. It knew what to do. Leif steadied her, eyes burning into hers. Then you'd better pray it stays on your side. Above them, the storm rolled with a new, restless hunger. The ocean had answered once, but it had not been gentle, and Myra knew, with a cold certainty, that the sea would not be tamed, it would demand more. Chapter 19. What the Sea Took. Leif had seen storms take everything. Boats, homes, whole families swallowed by the tide. But never before had he seen the sea obey. He stood on the shattered ridge, rain sliding down his face, lantern dimming in his hand. All around him, the survivors huddled in silence, their eyes locked on Myra. She knelt in the mud, cradling the atlas like a child, the stormlight still clinging to her skin. The wave she had called was gone, its roar fading into memory. The hunter had vanished into the clouds. Yet the silence it left behind pressed heavier than the thunder. Leif forced his voice to work. Is anyone hurt? The survivors stirred, muttering. Scratches, bruises, nothing worse. A miracle, considering what had just torn through them. He nodded, relief passing like a shadow over his face. But when his gaze returned to Myra, the relief curdled. She looked changed. Her shoulders hunched, shaking with exhaustion, but her eyes burned too brightly. The way the survivors stared at her was no different from the way they stared at the sea, reverence edged with fear. One of the older women whispered. She called the water. Another spat. That's no gift. That's a curse. Murmurs rippled, louder, sharper. Leif raised his lantern to quiet them. Enough. She saved your lives. You'd be ash in the tide if not for her. The muttering stilled, but the unease did not. He could feel it pressing in, the old dread that came when people sensed power they couldn't explain. Myra finally looked up at him. Her face was pale, lips trembling, but her voice was steady. It wasn't me. It was the sea. It remembered. Leif held her gaze, searching. She believed it. And worse, he almost did too. He crouched beside her, lowering his lantern so only she could see his face. Then listen to me. If the sea is answering you, you'd better make sure you're the one asking the questions, not it. She flinched, hugging the atlas closer. Leif's jaw tightened. He wanted to take it from her, to throw it into the deepest trench, and let the ocean keep its cursed memory. But he couldn't, not after it had saved them. Not after it had saved her. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The storm wasn't finished. Leif rose, lantern casting long shadows. We move inland, we rest, and when the company comes back, we'll be ready. The survivors obeyed, gathering their few belongings. Myra stood slowly, leaning on him for balance. The atlas pulsed faintly between them, warm as a heartbeat. Leif ignored the way it seemed to throb in rhythm with the sea itself. For now they had lived, but deep down he knew the sea never gave without taking. Chapter 20, Retaliation. Leif. They hadn't gone far inland when the first sound reached them. Not thunder, not tide. Engines. The survivors froze as one, faces turning toward the sky. Through the low storm clouds, beams of light lanced downward, slicing the darkness in surgical lines. Drones, dozens of them, moving in formation. And behind them, a roar too deep to belong to anything small. Leif's stomach dropped. They've brought the carriers. The tree line shook as something massive forced its way toward the coast. He caught flashes through the rain's steel hulls mounted on treaded wheels, like ships built to crawl across land. Harpoon launchers gleamed on their decks, each tipped with humming cables that spat sparks in the rain. The company had not just sent hunters. They had brought siege craft. Myra. Beside him, Myra clutched the atlas tighter. They're not after us this time. Her voice was small but certain. Leif followed her gaze back toward the shoreline. The carriers weren't aiming for the survivors on the ridge. Their harpoons angled out to sea. Gods, Leif muttered, realization cold as stone. They're going to shackle the ocean itself. The first harpoon fired, a hiss like a serpent. It plunged deep into the tide, cable glowing bright as it anchored into something unseen beneath the waves. The sea heaved, protesting, but the carrier braced, treads biting into the earth. The survivors, the people panicked, some screaming, some falling to their knees. They'll tear the coast apart, one shouted. They'll bring the whole sea down on us, another cried. Leif raised his lantern, trying to steady them. But his own heart hammered too hard to slow theirs. Myra stepped forward, the atlas thrumming with pain. She could feel the sea's anger, the way it writhed against the cables, thrashing like a netted beast. Each harpoon that struck sent another shudder through her body, like a lash. They're hurting it, she whispered, barely able to breathe. And it's going to hurt us back. Lightning split the clouds, and for a moment she swore. She saw a shape rising in the waves, vast, half-formed, older than anything human. The sea was answering. Leif caught Myra's arm, dragging her back before she collapsed. Listen to me. If they want a war with the sea, fine, but we're not their weapons. The ground quaked beneath them. Another harpoon slammed into the water. The tide convulsed, tearing a fishing boat in two like paper. Leif gritted his teeth. We move now, or we die in someone else's battle. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. There was no outrunning this. The company had declared war not on a town, not on survivors, but on the sea itself, and the sea was about to answer in full. Chapter 21. The Tide Strikes Back. Leif, the first wave struck like a hammer. It rose higher than the treetops, smashing against the carriers with a force that made the ground tremble beneath Leif's boots. Metal shrieked as one of the treads buckled, sending the behemoth listing sideways. The survivors screamed, scattering, but Leif forced them back into a huddle. Stay together. Stay low. His voice barely carried over the roar. The lantern flame flared wildly, as though it too was terrified. Myra couldn't move. The atlas in her arms burned against her chest, its pages flying open on their own. The storm no longer howled above her, it spoke. They cut me, they bind me, I will break them. The words weren't hers, yet they filled her mind. The sea's fury was her own, and her veins thrummed with its rage. She raised a shaking hand. The tide surged in answer, rising into a spiraling column that tore another carrier from the earth. Its harpoons snapped free, cables whipping like dying serpents before the machine was swallowed whole. The survivors wailed in awe and terror. Some dropped to their knees. Others shrank from her. Leif, he saw it, the way Myra stood, lit by lightning, the ocean raging in her eyes. She looked less like the woman he knew, and more like something born of the storm. Damn it, Myra, he muttered, gripping the lantern tighter. Don't lose yourself. But the sea didn't care what he begged. The company, the remaining carriers braced against the onslaught, their anchors biting deep into the mud. Harpoons fired in volleys, stabbing into the water faster than the sea could tear them loose. Drones dove at Myra, their beams converging on her figure, desperate to silence the source. But the storm itself shielded her. Lightning split the sky, frying one drone to ash mid-flight. Wind tore another apart, scattering its pieces across the ridge. The company's precision was no match for raw fury. Myra, her body shook, blood running from her nose, but she could not stop. The sea screamed through her, demanding release. She flung her arms wide, and the tide answered with a roar that split the coastline open. A whirlpool formed offshore, vast and unrelenting, dragging one of the carriers into its maw. Steel bent, shattered, and was gone. The ground beneath her cracked. Water seeped upward through the soil, flooding the ridge. Survivors cried out, scrambling for higher ground. Myra barely heard them. More, the sea whispered, "They will all drown." Leif shoved through the panicked crowd, reaching her side just as she lifted the atlas high, ready to summon another strike. He caught her wrist, forcing it down. "Enough, you'll kill us too." Her eyes met his wild, glowing, not entirely her own. For a heartbeat, he didn't recognize her. The lantern flame flickered low, nearly guttering out. "Myra," he said, voice breaking. "Come back, please." The storm howled louder, as if furious at his plea. The sea bucked, waves crashing higher, buildings collapsing into foam. And Myra stood trembling between two hungers, Leif's hand anchoring her, the ocean's voice consuming her. The next choice would not be hers alone. Chapter 22. The Drowning Voice. Myra. The atlas pulsed in her arms, beating like a second heart. Each thrum echoed with the sea's rage, louder than her own thoughts. More tear them apart, salt their bones. I will not be caged again. She staggered, salt spray and lightning burning her face. The company's last carrier loomed through the storm, bristling with harpoons. Its floodlights cut through the rain and pinned her in their glare. Myra lifted her hand, and the tide surged toward the machine. Leif clung to her, his boots sliding in the rising flood. Myra, listen to me, he shouted, though his words vanished in the roar. Her eyes glowed like deep-water lanterns. For a moment, he thought he had already lost her, but then her fingers twitched, faltering mid-gesture. His grip had slowed her, but only barely. The lantern flame sputtered in his hand, fighting to stay alive against the spray. If it went out, he feared it wasn't only the light they'd lose. The company, the carrier roared forward, treads grinding mud into foam. It fired harpoon after harpoon, lines sparking against the storm. One struck close, burying into the ground, not a hand's span from Myra's feet. She gasped, stumbling back as the steel cable coiled taut. The machine was anchoring itself, preparing for something worse. Drones poured from its hull, dozens this time, their beams fusing into a single cutting glare, trained on her chest. Myra, her pulse raced with the ocean's hunger. The sea wanted her to open wide, to unleash everything. She could feel the abyss waiting at the edges of her mind. But through the storm, she heard another voice, Leif's. Myra, you're not the ocean, you're you. It cut through, thin and fragile, but real. Her hand trembled. For the first time, she resisted the tide. The ocean howled inside her skull, furious. The ground split wider. Water burst upward, drowning half the ridge. Screams filled the air. Leif, he dragged her backward as the water rushed in, holding the lantern high. Its flame flared suddenly, searing brighter than before. The machines faltered. For a breath, the storm paused around them, as if the lantern had claimed a small sanctuary in the madness. Leif felt the weight of it then. This was not just fire. It was a counterpoint, a memory of stillness against the flood. Myra, he whispered, fight it, please. Myra, the ocean's voice shrieked in her mind, trying to tear her free from herself. You are mine. She screamed not words, but defiance, and slammed the atlas shut. The storm convulsed. The tide reared up one last time, smashing against the carrier with earth-splitting force. Steel buckled. Lights went out. The machine groaned, toppled, and vanished beneath the waves. And then silence. Aftermath. Rain still fell, But the storm's fury was gone. The sea withdrew, leaving ruin in its wake. The ridge was shattered. Survivors clung to broken beams and tangled roots. The carriers were wrecks. Myra collapsed, soaked and shaking, the atlas limp in her arms. Her eyes dimmed, losing their glow. Leif knelt beside her, pulling her close. The lantern's flame flickered low, guttering, but did not die. "Still here," he murmured. "We're still here." But as he held her, his eyes lifted to the horizon, where distant lights were gathering. More hunters, more machines. The company wasn't finished, and the ocean, Myra knew, wasn't either. Chapter 23, Reinforcements. Leif. The storm's last echoes faded into mist, but Leif had no time to breathe. Over the horizon, lights pierced the rain. At first, they seemed like a scatter of stars, but stars did not move in formation. Engines hummed. Shadows grew larger. Then came the low, mechanical thrum of rotors and turbines. Leif's stomach dropped. "They're coming again." Myra. Her body shook against him, every muscle spent, but she forced her eyes open. The ocean's voice had gone quiet, leaving only a ringing emptiness in her skull. And into that silence came the sound of machines. Hundreds of them. Her breath caught. "They don't stop." "No," Leif said grimly, tightening his grip on the lantern. "They don't. The company." The fleet arrived like a wall of steel. Not just carriers this time, but airships, dark hulks, with searchlights cutting through the haze. Their underbellies bristled with harpoons and cannons. Drones poured from their bays in shimmering swarms. Below, fresh amphibious crawlers rolled up the drowned shoreline, each one bigger than the last wave. Their engines churned the water into mud. A voice cracked across loudspeakers, flat and merciless. "Unauthorized activity, DETCTD. Property will be NEUTRALIZD. TRESPASSERS will be ELIMINATD." The survivors. Panic broke like a second tide. The refugees shrieked, scrambling up the fractured ridge, some slipping into the flood. Mothers clutched children, elders dragged broken limbs through the muck. Leif ran among them, shouting, forcing order where he could. "Stay together. Stay off the flats." His throat was raw, his words barely carrying above the engines. But it was chaos. Already, drones swept down, corralling stragglers with searing beams. One man tried to fight back with a broken spear, only to be cut down in a flash of white. Myra. She forced herself to stand. The atlas clutched weakly in her hands. The ocean whispered faintly in the back of her mind, like a tide pulling at her ankles. It wanted her to call again, to destroy again, but she trembled, her body hollowed from the last unleashing. If she opened the pages now, she wasn't sure she'd close them again. Her gaze lifted to the sky, to the descending airships. Each one carried enough fire to raise the coastline for miles. She whispered hoarse, "We can't win this." Leif. He heard her. He hated how much he agreed, but surrender wasn't an option either. The lantern pulsed in his hand, the flame suddenly burning brighter as the searchlights fixed on them. It cast long, defiant shadows across the mud. Leif set his jaw. Then we don't win, we endure. The first strike, the airships opened fire. A volley of harpoons streaked down, trailing lightning arcs across the storm-racked sky. Explosions shook the ridge. Earth split. Survivors were thrown screaming into the flood. One harpoon speared the ground barely a stride from Myra, its cable hissing as it dragged taut. The mud cracked. The land itself began to tear away beneath her feet. The company was no longer hunting. It was erasing. Chapter 24. The Cost of Water. Myra. The ground tore open under the carrier's harpoon. Mud and salt water frothed around her ankles, pulling her toward the flood. Her arms shook, barely strong enough to keep the atlas from slipping from her grasp. She could taste iron on her tongue, blood running from her nose, maybe her ears. Her body had nothing left to give, but the company didn't wait. The airship's cannons rotated down, engines whining as they charged for another volley. The survivors would be erased. Leif would be erased, and the ocean knew it. Open me, it whispered, velvet and cruel. I will save them. You will be gone, but they will live. Leif saw her trembling, saw the blood, the hollowed eyes, the way her hands clutched the atlas like a lifeline and a curse. He knew what she was about to do. No, he rasped, forcing his way through the screaming crowd to her side. He seized her shoulders, shaking her. You'll burn yourself out. Don't let it take you. Her gaze flickered to him, wet and terrified, but behind it was resolve. A decision already made. Leif, she whispered, voice breaking. Hold on to me. The unleashing. The atlas snapped open on its own, pages whipping in the gale. Symbols seared across the air, glowing as though carved into the storm itself. Myra screamed, and the ocean screamed with her. The tide convulsed, rising higher than the airships themselves. A wall of water towered over the battlefield, blotting out the sky. The first wave struck. Airships reeled, rotors shattering, hulls torn like paper. Crawlers vanished beneath churning foam. Drones fell from the air like rain, sparks hissing out in the flood. The second wave followed, even higher. The ridge split apart entirely, dragging forests, buildings, and screams into the deep. Myra, she felt herself unraveling. Her heartbeat wasn't hers anymore, it was the ocean's, endless and crushing. Her bones dissolved into salt. Her breath was the roar of waves. Her mind was splitting, scattering, sinking. Leif's voice was the only tether left. I've got you, I've got you. She clung to it desperately. If she let go, she knew she would never come back. The survivors, they could not comprehend what they saw. Some wept, some screamed. A few dropped to their knees, praying not to gods, but to Myra herself. But the majority only ran, scrambling higher, away from the flood, away from her. The company, even they faltered. Loudspeakers sputtered to silence. Searchlights went dark one by one. The fleet crumbled under nature's wrath, and for the first time, the company retreated. But retreat did not mean defeat. The collapse, when the final wave broke, the coastline was gone. Only shattered rock and endless foam remained. Myra crumpled forward, the atlas slipping from her hands, sinking into the flood. Her chest barely rose. Her eyes rolled back, dim and glassy. Leif caught her before she hit the water, clutching her against him, as though sheer will could keep her alive. The lantern guttered in his hand, then flared wildly, as if trying to keep her tethered. "Myra," he whispered, his voice raw. "Stay with me, stay." Her lips moved, faint, nearly drowned by the wind. "The sea wants me." And then her body went limp in his arms. Chapter 25. The Drowning Dream. Myra, the ocean's mind. Darkness, weightless and infinite. Myra floated, her body gone, her thoughts unmoored. Salt pressed against her from every direction, but she didn't drown, she dissolved. "You are mine now," the ocean whispered. "The shore cannot hold you. Flesh cannot hold you." Images surged around her. Drowned cities, leviathans moving through black depths, storms swallowing entire coasts. She felt the endless hunger, the patience of tides eroding stone, the fury of waves against cages. And beneath it all, a strange tenderness, currents curling around her like arms. A promise: if you surrender, you will never be alone. Myra's voice was fragile, breaking in the flood. "I don't want to be alone, but I don't want to be lost either." The sea answered with silence. And then it showed her a mirror, her own reflection, shimmering on the surface of a tide pool. Half of her face was her own, the other half foam, formless, ever shifting. The choice stood before her: dissolve into infinity, or fight for a shape. Leif, the physical world. Myra. Leif knelt in the mud, cradling her limp body. Her skin was ice cold, her pulse fluttering like a dying bird. The atlas was gone, sucked into the flood, but the lantern flame burned furiously, as though fighting for her soul. Around him, the survivors huddled in the wreckage. Children sobbed into their mother's arms. Men and women stared hollow-eyed at the drowned horizon. They had survived, but only barely. And above them, in the mist, the faint hum of engines still lingered. The company was not gone, just waiting, watching. Leif pressed the lantern close to Myra's chest. "Don't you dare leave me," he growled, more to the ocean than to her. "You hear me? She's not yours." The flame flared, and for a heartbeat, her lips moved, no sound, only a whisper of breath. The survivors stared at her like she was something holy and terrifying. To them, Myra was no longer just a woman. She was an omen, and to Leif, she was the edge of a knife, one breath from returning, one breath from being claimed forever by the tide. Chapter 26. Tides Within, Tides Without. Myra inside the ocean's mind. The tide pool mirror rippled. Myra leaned closer, her own face staring back, half her, half foam. Then the water deepened, and voices rose from below. "Stay with us," they whispered. Shapes swam upward, men, women, children. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies translucent like salt crystal shells. Drowned souls, carried forever in the current. One of them looked like her mother, another like her brother, both long dead. Her chest seized. "No, you're not real. We are everything the sea remembers," they answered. And the sea remembers all. They reached for her, hands of water brushing her arms. "Join us. Let go of pain. Let go of struggle." For a moment, she wanted to sink, to dissolve into their embrace, to never fight again. But in the distance, faint, thin as a thread, she heard Leif's voice. "Don't you dare leave me." Myra clenched her fists. "I am not yours, not yet." The drowned figures dissolved into foam. The tide pool shattered. Darkness roared around her again, and the choice remained endless surrender or painful defiance. Leif, the physical world. The ridge was unrecognizable, a fractured skeleton jutting above a drowned coast. Survivors clung to one another, faces pale with terror. They looked to Leif, not as a friend, not as a man, as someone who had walked out of the storm alive, as Myra's anchor. He hated it, but he stood anyway. "We don't have time to grieve," he said, his voice raw. "The company's not done. You saw what they brought. They'll bring more. If we stay here, we're finished." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, fear, doubt, anger. A fisherman spat into the mud. "Run where? There's nothing left." Leif held up the lantern. Its flame glowed steady, throwing long shadows across their gaunt faces. "There's the island." Myra crossed once. "We can again." Silence. All eyes shifted to her, pale, unconscious, her breath shallow in Leif's arms. She looked both fragile and terrifying. A child whispered, "She'll save us again." Leif's gut twisted. He wanted to deny it, to tell them Myra wasn't a weapon, wasn't their salvation. But the truth was bitter. Without her, they had no chance. He tightened his grip on the lantern. "We move before nightfall. Gather what you can. Help the weak. If we fall apart now, the company wins without firing a shot." The survivors stirred, slowly, hesitantly, but his words caught. Movement began, shattered people piecing themselves into a column, driven less by hope than by the memory of the flood. Leif crouched beside Myra, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "I'm buying you time," he murmured, "but you've got to come back." The lantern's flame flickered, as though in answer. Chapter 27. Return to shore. Myra, her first breath, was a gasp of salt water. Myra lurched upright, coughing, the taste of brine thick in her throat. Her chest heaved, her body shaking with cold. She felt Leif's hands on her shoulders, steadying her, and the lantern's glow warming her face. Her eyes fluttered open, The world was blurred, half drowned, but she saw him. Leif, she croaked, voice raw. Relief cracked his face, but fear shadowed it too. You came back, he said softly. Myra wanted to answer, but her ears filled with whispers. The ocean still lingered inside her. Not a roar now, but a steady murmur, like a tide at the edge of sleep. I am not finished with you. She shivered. The survivors. Gasps rippled through the survivors as she rose. Some cried out in awe, others bowed their heads. One old woman pressed her hands together as though in prayer. She's chosen, someone whispered. She's more than us, another said. No, a third muttered, trembling. She's not one of us anymore. Myra's chest tightened. Their stares burned hotter than the storm. They wanted her to be savior, weapon, omen, anything but human. She turned away, clutching her arms. Leif, he saw it, the way she flinched under their gazes, the way her hands shook. She wasn't healed. She was barely standing. But to the others, that didn't matter. They saw only the flood still dripping from her skin, the ruin she had called down. Leif stepped forward, planting himself between Myra and the crowd. His voice cut sharp, steady. She's alive. That's what matters. We move now. She needs rest, not worship. Some murmured protest, but no one challenged him outright. The survivors began to gather their meager belongings, forming a rough line toward the shattered path into the impossible island. Myra, she leaned against him as they walked, each step like wading through surf. The ocean's whispers tugged at her mind, but Leif's presence steadied her. Quietly, so only he could hear, she said, I wasn't supposed to come back. His grip tightened on her hand. Then the tide made a mistake. You're here, with me. Her throat ached. She wanted to believe him. But she felt the ocean inside her, waiting, watching, patient. Every step toward the island felt like walking deeper into its grasp. Chapter 28. Fire on the Water. The crossing. The survivors moved in a ragged line, stepping across the shattered reef that stretched toward the island like broken bones. Lanterns swayed in the night, casting jittering halos on the spray. Every footstep was cautious, yet hurried, aware the company would not give them long. Myra walked with Leif's arm braced around her waist. The ocean murmured in her mind, but it felt distant now, cold and withholding, as if it had given what it could and withdrawn to watch. The first shot, the shriek of metal, split the night. A spotlight snapped alive above the waves. Then another. Engines roared. Dark silhouettes rose from the sea hunter skiffs, fast and sleek, armed with mounted cannons. Their beams swept the reef, pinning the survivors in pale circles of light. Down, Leif shouted, dragging Myra low as the first barrage tore the air apart. Explosions shattered stone, spraying shards across the path. Screams rang out as men and women were hurled into the black water. Leif, he forced himself up, chest hammering. He saw the survivors scatter like birds, some huddling, some running toward the island's shadow. The skiffs closed in from both sides, circling like wolves. They'll slaughter us here. He clenched his jaw, raised his voice. Keep moving. Stay low, don't bunch up. Go. A blast struck the reef ahead, collapsing a section into frothing water. The path forward was gone. The survivors froze in panic. Leif's stomach dropped. They were trapped between the skiffs and the sea. Myra, her head spun with firelight and screams. She felt the ocean pressing at the edges of her mind, urging her hand again. But when she reached for it, pain lanced through her skull. The tide recoiled, leaving her empty. Not now, not yet. She staggered forward, teeth clenched, forcing her breath steady. Leif. He turned, seeing the strain in her eyes. No, he said fiercely. Not again. You'll kill yourself. We'll all die if I don't, she whispered back. The company. The nearest skiff drew closer, its cannon rotating toward the huddled survivors. Over the roar of engines, a voice rang out through a loudspeaker. Return the asset, and we'll spare the rest. All eyes turned to Myra. Her stomach hollowed. She knew what they saw, not a girl, but the weapon that had drowned a fleet. The whispers around her sharpened. Give her to them. Save yourselves. Leif stepped forward, standing between Myra and the lights. His voice cracked like thunder. If you want her, you'll have to kill us all. The silence that followed was razor-thin, until the skiff's cannon flared, fire spilling across the reef. Chapter 29. The Breaking Point. On the reef shuddered under cannon fire. Stones split, water geysered up, and the survivors screamed as the company's skiffs circled closer. The night sky was shredded by tracer fire and the acrid tang of smoke. Leif dragged a wounded boy behind the jagged outcrop of coral. His hands were raw, breath tearing at his lungs. Too many dead already. He looked across the reef and saw the others scattering, families, fighters, broken souls, trapped in a maze of fire. Above the chaos, the loudspeaker voice bellowed again. Return the asset, or you all drown. Myra crouched in the shadows, head clutched in her hands. The ocean murmured at the edges of her mind, like a storm pressing against a door. Each time she tried to open it, agony ripped through her skull. She looked at the faces around her, terrified, desperate. Their eyes kept cutting to her. She knew the thought in their throats, but unspoken. Give her up. Leif, her voice trembled. I don't think I can hold it back much longer. You don't need to, he shot back, eyes burning. We'll find another way. There is no other way, she whispered. It wants me to act. Leif. Another explosion ripped the reef apart, throwing him and Myra against the stone. His ears rang, mouth full of salt and blood. He saw one of the skiffs pivot toward a cluster of survivors, its cannon charging. Damn it, Leif surged up, waving his arms, firing his salvaged pistol at the skiff's armored glass. Pointless sparks danced across steel, The cannon swung toward him now. He braced himself for the end. The breaking point. Something inside Myra tore. Not gently, not willingly, the ocean ripped through her, flooding every nerve. Her scream was swallowed by the roar of rising water. The sea answered. A surge erupted beneath the skiff, lifting it like a toy. Metal groaned, twisted, then snapped in two. Flames and oil spilled across the water, igniting in a curtain of fire. The survivors froze, staring at her, at what she had become. Myra staggered forward, eyes glowing with reflected lightning. Her voice was both hers and not. Leave them, or I will end you all. The company, the loudspeaker crackled, almost uncertain. Then another voice cut in calm, cold, unyielding. Asset unstable, termination authorized, full fire. Every remaining skiff opened up at once. The reef dissolved in thunder. Myra again. She screamed as the ocean poured through her veins, dragging her deeper. She raised both arms, and the sea rose with her, walls of water towering above the reef. Bullets and fire vanished in the spray, but with every wave she unleashed, pain lanced sharper. Blood ran from her nose. Her knees buckled. The ocean wasn't giving, it was taking. Piece by piece. Leif, he caught her as she collapsed, her body burning with cold. Around them, the survivors pressed forward, crying out in terror and awe as the skiffs struggled against the rising tide. Myra, hold on, Leif shouted, shaking her. Her lips moved, barely audible. It wants everything. Then the water crashed down again, sweeping hunters from the reef and dragging them screaming into the dark. Chapter 30. Into the Abyss. Myra. The reef dissolved. Salt water filled her lungs, yet she breathed. Light fractured into endless blues, then into nothing. She fell deeper, not into water, but into thought. The ocean's mind unfolded around her. Vast, cold, incomprehensible. Cities of coral that breathed. Currents that spoke in tones older than words. She felt every creature flicker past her awareness. Whale song, the hiss of plankton, the pulse of sharks. At the center was fear. It was not hers. It was the ocean's. A raw wound. Images thundered through her, nets choking life, oil bleeding across waves, machines carving the seabed. Humanity's hunger, endless and sharp. The ocean's voice swelled, neither male nor female, more vibration than sound. You are mine, vessel, weapon, drown them or drown yourself. Myra clutched her head, body convulsing in this mental tide. No, I won't be your weapon. I woe. The current coiled tighter, pulling her deeper into its abyss. Then you will be nothing. Leif. Gunfire ripped the night. Leif knelt over Myra's body, her skin pale, lips flecked with blood. She didn't stir as bullets whined overhead. The survivors were scattered, but he forced his voice to cut through panic. Circle up, protect her. 24 men and women, half-starved, half-armed, closed in around Myra. They raised scavenged rifles, knives, even sharpened coral spears. The company's skiffs surged closer, engines snarling as they opened suppressing fire across the reef. "Push them back," Leif roared. "Don't give them an inch." A cannon blast slammed into the coral wall beside him, showering sparks and shards. His ears rang, but he didn't stop. He raised his pistol and fired into the blinding spotlight of a skiff until the glass burst in a spray of sparks. The machine swerved, temporarily blinded. But more were coming, too many. Myra, she stumbled through the abyss, currents clawing at her. The ocean showed her visions, fleets burning, entire coastlines swallowed. Together, we could end them all. Myra's teeth clenched, fury sparking in her chest. "You want extinction just like them. You're no better." The current whipped around her, furious. For a heartbeat, she thought it would crush her. Then she saw something else faint, but there. A thread of warmth in the abyss. Not the ocean, not fear. Leif's voice, echoing in her bones. "We'll find another way." Her fingers reached toward it. The abyss clawed tighter. She screamed and kept reaching. "Leif." He ducked behind cover, rifle shots sparking off stone inches from his head. A young girl screamed as a round caught her leg. Leif hauled her down, pressing her wound with his own hand, then shoved her toward another survivor. He looked back at Myra's still body. She twitched once, lips parting as though caught in some silent battle. "Come back, Myra," he muttered, voice raw. "Don't leave me here." Then he rose again, empty pistol in his grip, facing the advancing skiffs head on. Chapter 31. The Last Stand of the Reef. The company's push. Engines roared as the skiffs closed the circle. Their mounted cannons poured fire into the reef, smashing coral, tearing survivors from cover. Searchlights cut through smoke and spray, illuminating faces frozen in terror. Over the loudspeaker, the commander's voice rang out steady, merciless. "Terminate resistance. Retrieve the body intact." Bullets shredded the air. Survivors screamed, ducking low, dragging the wounded with them. Leif pressed his back against the broken coral, chest heaving. His pistol was empty, his knife slick with blood. He glanced at Myra's motionless form, pale as driftwood, chest rising only faintly. "She's not coming back, not yet." He forced himself up, shouting above the gunfire. "On me, keep them off her." A handful of survivors obeyed, ragged men and women, some bleeding, some barely standing. They surged forward with him, hurling spears, firing scavenged rifles until barrels glowed. One skiff lurched as a Molotov burst across its deck, flames chewing into metal. A survivor cheered, only to be cut down by a cannon round a heartbeat later. Leif's throat burned. Each death twisted inside him. How many more before we break? The survivors. Fear spread like fire. A voice rose from the huddled crowd. "She's cursed. Give her to them." Others joined, panic boiling over. She's killing us all. Hand her over before we're slaughtered. Leif spun, eyes blazing. Shut it. We don't survive without her, don't you see that? But doubt gnawed at the survivors. Their gazes flicked from Myra's limp body to the hunter craft closing in. The company's advance. 3 skiffs drove hard into the reef, scraping close enough for boarding hooks to bite into stone. Black-clad soldiers leapt from the decks, rifles raised, moving in precision. Leif's gut dropped. This wasn't bombardment anymore. They were here to take her. Line up, he roared. No one gets through. The ragged defenders clashed with armored troops in a frenzy of steel and fists. Coral knives snapped against body armor. Blood ran into the tide. Leif fought like a man possessed, blade flashing. Every strike driven by one thought. They will not touch her. At Myra's side, amid the chaos, 2 soldiers broke past the line, sprinting toward Myra's body. A young survivor tried to stop them, but one strike from a rifle butt sent her sprawling. Leif saw it too late. His heart clenched, but the ground beneath the soldiers heaved. Water surged up from cracks in the reef, smashing them against stone. Myra's body twitched. Her lips parted in a whisper, barely audible over the chaos. Not yet. Then she went still again. Leif, hope flared, sharp as pain. He staggered back to her, covering her body with his own as bullets raked the stone. Hold on, Myra, he whispered through gritted teeth. If you're coming back, make it now. But the ocean stayed silent, and the company kept coming. Chapter 32, The Last Tide. The breaking line. The reef was fire and ruin. Survivors fell back in tatters, their cries drowned by cannon blasts. The company's soldiers advanced methodically, rifles spitting fire, their boots crunching coral. Leif fought until his arms went numb, his blade slick with blood. He saw the line buckling. Survivors pushed back step by step toward Myra's motionless form. His heart clawed at his chest. It's over. Then Myra gasped. Myra. Her eyes snapped open. Not blue, not human. The abyss glowed inside them. She felt the ocean's will pouring through her veins, vast and merciless. For one heartbeat, she teetered on the edge of surrender. Then she remembered Leif's voice, his hand pulling her back from drowning. Not a weapon, not your slave, mine. She rose, hair streaming in a wind that came from no direction. Blood streaked her face, but her voice was steady when she spoke, louder than the gunfire, deeper than the tide. Enough. The ocean answers. The sea convulsed. Walls of water rose on both sides of the reef, towering, snarling, ready to collapse. Lightning forked across the storm-churned sky. The company's soldiers faltered, rifles lowering. For the first time, fear cracked their precision. Myra lifted her hands, and the walls of water obeyed. They crashed inward. Skiffs shattered like driftwood. Soldiers flung screaming into the abyss. Metal bent, fire drowned, engines torn to shreds beneath crushing pressure. The survivors dropped to their knees, shielding their faces from spray and thunder. Leif, he staggered back, watching the impossible. Myra stood in the storm's heart, her silhouette etched in lightning. She was both terrifying and beautiful, every inch alive with power not her own, yet somehow claimed. The ocean was hers, and she was its. But even as she unleashed the tide, he saw her body falter. Blood streamed from her nose, her lips. Her legs trembled. Each surge cost her more. She's burning herself alive. The company's last stand. Amid the destruction, one vessel held steady, the massive command skiff, armored and bristling with weapons. Its engines roared as it plowed through the waves Myra summoned, cannons swiveling toward her. The commander's voice boomed across the chaos. Asset compromised. Initiate total erasure. All guns turned on her. Myra, she staggered, the ocean roaring in her skull. Her body screamed for rest, but she forced her arms skyward. The tide surged one final time. Not a wave, not a wall. An entire horizon of water rose, blotting out the stars. The command skiff fired everything it had, rounds streaking through the night like falling suns. They vanished into the rising mass. Myra's voice broke with pain as she let it fall. The last tide consumed the fleet. Metal screamed, lights vanished, engines silenced beneath crushing water. When the sea withdrew, only shattered wreckage bobbed in the dark. Silence. The reef was still. Survivors gaped, their faces lit by the dying glow of flames on the water. Myra dropped to her knees, trembling, every breath a ragged knife. Her glow dimmed, leaving only exhaustion and pain. Leif ran to her, catching her before she collapsed fully. Her eyes flickered up at him, dazed. "It's done," she whispered. "I stopped them." But in her gaze, he saw something else. The ocean still inside her, watching. Chapter 33. Ashes and Tides. The morning after. Dawn crept across the horizon, pale and cold. The sea was littered with wreckage, twisted steel, burning oil, and bodies drifting in silence. Gulls circled above, their cries sharp against the hush. The survivors stood on the reef, hollow-eyed, wrapped in shock. Some wept. Others stared blankly at the horizon, as if unable to believe the company was truly gone. Leif knelt beside Myra, brushing salt and blood from her face. She stirred weakly, her eyes half-lidded. The glow was gone, but something remained, something deep, shifting, impossible. "You saved us," he whispered. Her lips trembled into a faint, weary smile. For now, the impossible island. By midday, the survivors began the crossing again. The reef stretched ahead like a broken bridge toward the mist-shrouded island. Leif led them, Myra leaning on his arm. Every step felt heavier, every silence louder. The island loomed larger, its cliffs jagged, crowned with green unknown. Strange birds wheeled overhead, their cries unlike anything Leif had heard before. It was a place untouched, otherworldly refuge, or something else entirely. The people murmured as they walked, hope and dread tangled in every voice. Myra, she felt the ocean's weight still pressing in her mind, quieter now, but present, not commanding, not demanding, waiting. When she glanced back at the water, it seemed to look at her, watching, expectant. She shivered. Leif noticed. What is it? She shook her head, unwilling to say. The truth was too heavy. The ocean had not let her go. It never would. The company, as they reached the first stones of the island's shore, a low groan rolled across the waves. Survivors froze, turning back. Far on the horizon, smoke still rose. And through the haze, something vast moved steel, black intact. The company's true fleet. The commander's voice echoed in Myra's memory, cold and certain. Asset compromised. Initiate total erasure. Her stomach hollowed. What she destroyed was only their vanguard. They would come again. The cliffhanger. On the island's edge, the survivors sank to their knees, kissing the ground, weeping in relief. Leif stood tall, scanning both sea and sky, one hand steadying Myra. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. Myra looked at the horizon, the wreckage, the shadows moving in the smoke. She felt the ocean stirring inside her, restless, whispering promises of power. She whispered back, voice trembling, "It's not over. It will never be over." The tide hissed against the rocks, as if in answer, and the story closed not with peace, but with the sound of waves rising again. Epilogue: The Whispering Tide. Night had fallen again. The survivors huddled inland, fires flickering against the alien trees of the island. Sleep came to them in fits, haunted by memory of cannon fire and drowning screams. Myra sat apart at the edge of the shore. Her feet sank into the cool sand, waves brushing against her toes like a living pulse. The stars were sharp above, but she felt them dim beside the black immensity of the sea. Her reflection trembled in the tide, no longer entirely her own. For a long while, she only watched. Then, softly, she spoke. "I won't let you use me." The waves lapped higher, soaking her knees. A voice stirred in her mind, low and resonant, neither kind nor cruel, but vast. "You are already mine." Her hands clenched, nails cutting her palms. "If I am yours, then you are mine too." The tide swelled, tugging harder, as if testing her. Then it stilled. The voice fell silent, leaving only the hush of the waves. Myra closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek, salt on salt. Behind her, the forest of the impossible island whispered with strange calls. Ahead of her, the horizon waited dark, endless, watching. And within her chest, the ocean waited too. And that's where book 1 ends, Myra standing at the edge of the world, with the ocean itself whispering in her veins. The company may have been beaten back, but they are far from finished. The real war between humanity and the ocean's will is only just beginning. Book 2 will dive deeper into the impossible island, the mysteries buried beneath the tide, and the terrible cost of Myra's bond with the sea. Will Leif and the survivors hold their fragile freedom? Or has Myra already become something beyond human? Waterfire. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the continuation. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thought Balloon, what did you think of Myra's choice? Thought Balloon, do you trust the ocean? Thought Balloon, and what do you think the company's next move will be? Your support, shares, comments, even theories helps shape where this story can go next. Let's build this adventure together. Milky Open. Stay tuned, because the tide has only just begun to rise.